There's a shape you've been living inside. You may not see it. You may not speak it. But every decision, reaction, thought, and hesitation traces its lines. This shape doesn't sit on paper or hang in a gallery. It doesn't glow on your screen. It lives quietly underneath your perception, humming beneath your memories, constructing the emotional scaffolding of your life. It's the shape of the symbols you carry, the archetypes you inherit, and the stories that run like silent rivers through the back of your mind. Right now, you are standing at the edge of something ancient, older than language, older than belief, older even than thought as we know it. You're standing in front of the mirror, not the mirror in your bathroom or the reflection in a window, but the metaphoric glyph behind perception itself. The mirror that doesn't show your face. It shows your code, because this is what no one ever told you. Your consciousness is not neutral. It is not an empty lens passively receiving reality. It is a constructed architecture, a beautifully layered signal structure shaped by archetypes, visual symbols, emotional geometries, and mythic sequences, most of which were installed long before you knew how to name them. This video is not a motivational speech. It's not a spiritual pep talk. It is a decoding interface, a method of reaccessing the symbolic infrastructure that is already shaping your timelines, choices, emotional patterns, and identity scripts. You are not broken. You are brilliantly constructed, but that construction has been hidden from you, not because of conspiracy, not because of malice, but because it's easier to keep a world spinning when its architects forget they are architects. Here, you will begin to remember. In this long-form masterclass, we will track the primal emergence of symbolic intelligence, the way a child draws circles before it speaks words, how storylines nest themselves inside the nervous system, how archetypes aren't entertainment devices but cognitive codebases. We'll expose how your moods are often spatial distortions of shape, how memory is not chronological but geometric, and how the narrative you believe is your past is actually a symbolic echo chamber determining your emotional ceiling. You'll learn to see through emotional resonance loops, frequency scaffolding, and dimensional syntax. You'll recognize that fear, confusion, and even recurring life challenges are not moral failings or energetic blocks. They are symbolic overloads, shape mismatches, or outdated archetypes that no longer fit your current signal. And through this realization, something subtle but irreversible will happen. Your sense of time will begin to shift. Your identity will become fluid, and your capacity to design your consciousness from inside out, not from the prepackaged tropes of culture, but from your own symbolic fluency, will emerge. We'll explore experiential techniques, not fluffy affirmations or scripted meditations, but deeply coded visual and somatic practices. You'll learn to trace the glyphs encoded in your breath, sound, and movement. You'll build internal temples, walk spiral timelines, sculpt feelings into form, recode stories from archetypal reversal, and speak from a symbolic lexicon that bypasses logic and anchors direct coherence. This is not a passive watch. This is a reformatting experience. This isn't about theory. This is about tools. And the deeper you go, the more you will remember you've been shaping this entire time. You've simply forgotten how to see it. So welcome to the threshold. Welcome to symbolic engineering. Let's begin where all patterns start, with the first shape behind thought. Before you ever spoke a word, you made marks, lines, circles, scribbles, forms, not as art, not as decoration, as language before you had language. Your first understanding of reality was not verbal. It was spatial, emotional, geometric. Thought does not begin as internal narration. It emerges as unspoken movement, patterned, directional, symbolic. Infants repeat spirals in the air, toddlers draw loops in the dirt, and children dream in visuals long before sentences. These are not meaningless developmental quirks. They are evidence of symbolic cognition arising from the body. This is the original layer of perception, shape before sound. Thought begins as form. Each belief is a structure. Each emotion a geometry. Each identity a set of internal shapes repeating in patterns so fluid, so rehearsed, that you no longer see them, but they shape you, just as a river is carved by its bed. Your thoughts move along symbolic pathways, installed early, repeated often, and rarely questioned. This is why some people return again and again to the same mood, the same story, the same decision dressed in different clothes. It's not a lack of willpower. It's symbolic programming running beneath the threshold of conscious language. So how does symbolic programming begin? Not with ideas, not with instruction. It begins with form, a circle, a line, a triangle. These are not abstract symbols. They are emotional encodings. A circle can hold comfort, repetition, enclosure. A triangle can suggest tension, hierarchy, striving. A spiral can embody memory, recursion, expansion. Each shape speaks a language without words. And over time, those shapes combine. They become scripts, storylines, identity roles, emotional reflexes. They crystallize into the unspoken architecture of the psyche. Consider this. Every trauma has a shape. Some are sharp, angular, fragmented. Others are loops with no resolution. Some are dead ends, linear lines that collapse under pressure. When these shapes get locked into the nervous system, they create echo chambers in thought. This is why symbolic awareness is not aesthetic. It is essential. Until you see the shape behind the thought, you cannot rewire the pattern. The first stage in symbolic engineering is recognition. To recognize means to recognize, to know again what you have forgotten. And what you've forgotten is that you were once fluent in symbol before you could spell your name. So how do you begin to see thought as shape again? Start by noticing the movements of your inner space. When you feel an emotion, trace it. Does it expand, contract, spike, coil, flatten? This is not metaphor. This is your system showing you the shape of the signal it's holding. Language may lie, but shape does not. Next, notice your repeated loops. Which decisions keep recreating themselves? Which relationships play out the same storyline? These aren't coincidences. They are symbolic scripts embedded in your operating system. And once you begin to trace the shapes of your life, not as content but as form, you begin to extract yourself from them. Symbolic extraction isn't rejection. It's visibility. To see the shape is to regain choice. For example, let's say you've spent years unconsciously inhabiting the rescuer archetype. The one who fixes, saves, and supports, often at your own cost. This identity isn't just a story. It's a symbolic structure. It has edges, loops, thresholds. It carries tension between agency and approval. And as long as it stays invisible, it runs you. But once you see it as a shape, once you name its structure, you create the possibility to step outside of it. You're no longer the shape. You're the one shaping. There's a concept called symbolic density. This refers to how loaded or saturated a thought form is with shape, archetype, and emotional resonance. Highly dense symbolic clusters are often found at the core of identity. They form nodes around which memory, meaning, and decision anchor themselves. When you touch a symbolic node, you don't just affect one belief, you reroute a cluster of patterns. So the aim here is not to randomly analyze shapes. The aim is precision, to locate the high-density symbolic nodes in your inner structure, to trace the shapes of recurring perception, and to begin shifting your cognition from word-based to form-based awareness. This shift isn't philosophical. It's functional. When you begin seeing thought as shape, decision as geometry, identity as layered design, you step out of emotional entanglement and into symbolic authorship. This is the return to origin shape. Not the shape given to you by society. Not the archetypes you inherited unconsciously. But the shape your awareness draws when it remembers it is both canvas and creator. This is where symbolic engineering begins. Next, we will explore the hidden maps beneath your emotional and perceptual terrain. The unspoken architecture that orients your attention, your narrative loops, and your sense of space. We move now into the cartography of awareness. A thought isn't born as a sentence. It doesn't emerge as grammar. This first breath is spatial. Before logic enters the equation, something older moves, something fluid, directional, wordless. Thought emerges first as trajectory, and that trajectory has a shape. That shape becomes habit. That habit becomes belief, and belief hardens into perception. You are not thinking thoughts. You are moving through shapes, and those shapes form loops, paths, structures. They aren't arbitrary, they're symbolic, and they anchor your reality. Start by tracing a single recurring thought you experience. One that returns, maybe daily, something reactive, something familiar. The thought might feel specific, but beneath its surface lives a shape, an emotional trajectory that repeats. Is it spiraling? Is it jagged and sharp? Does it collapse inward? That is the true signature of the thought. It's not the content, it's the form. Your nervous system doesn't care about sentences. It responds to pattern, signal, structure. Thought, when translated through the emotional body, becomes shape. This is the forgotten language, one that predates symbols as letters. The body recognizes archetype and form long before it knows how to interpret meaning. A triangle seen in childhood can invoke conflict. A circle may feel safe. A jagged line might trigger anxiety, not because of meaning, but because the nervous system reads shape as signal. This is symbolic memory, and it's the origin of belief. To understand this, you must observe how early cognition forms. A toddler begins to sense emotional tone from facial shape. A curved smile, narrowed brows, wide eyes. The child doesn't understand vocabulary, it responds to shape patterning. The face becomes an emotional glyph. Over time, this expands to surroundings. A room with vertical lines and sharp corners holds different emotional resonance than a space with curved architecture. Geometry doesn't just describe space. It encodes mood. That encoding becomes your internal language. And eventually it becomes invisible, like the scaffolding behind a wall. As adulthood sets in, many lose contact with this layer. They begin to over-identify with linguistic constructs. They confuse the sentence for the signal. They forget that thought is a container for form, not the source. But this shift can be reversed. Start by identifying your shape habits. Do you experience recurring inner loops? Decision paralysis that spirals? Emotional responses that spike and drop like triangles? Stories that flatten your future into a line with no dimension? These are shape patterns, not flaws. And once you begin to recognize these patterns, not as problems but as symbolic signatures, you can begin to redesign them. Symbolic awareness is not metaphorical thinking. It is dimensional clarity. It's the ability to perceive thought, emotion, memory, and identity as composed entities, structured, repeatable, and rewirable. This matters because change doesn't happen through force. It happens through structural realignment. You don't need to force new thoughts. You need to create new shapes. A mind shaped by spirals will never respond to linear motivation. A self trapped in fragmented identity glyphs will not integrate by repeating affirmations. But when you reshape your inner structure, when you layer in symbolic coherence, change becomes a natural signal response. The nervous system relaxes. Attention reorients. Choices clarify, not because you tried harder, but because the shape changed. Thought is the residue of symbolic movement. It's the surface of something deeper, emotional resonance traveling across geometric pathways. So begin tracking those pathways. Start by drawing your feelings not as expressions but as forms. A moment of anxiety. Does it feel like a box with no exit? A wave of sadness. Is it a dissolving line? A sagging curve? An insight that feels electric. Is it radial? Explosive? Symmetrical? These drawings aren't art. They're structural reflections. The more you practice this, the more you reveal the symbolic architecture you inhabit. Once you see the shapes clearly, you can begin shaping them intentionally. This is symbolic authorship, not storytelling but signalcraft. The capacity to feel your thought forms as form, and redesign your consciousness from there. Next, we will explore the hidden terrain these shapes move through, the internal map behind awareness itself. A cartography that silently orients perception, emotion, and self-location. Inside you, there is a map, not a diagram of organs, not a neurological scan, a silent cartography. One that forms the terrain your attention travels through daily. This map isn't seen, it's felt. It guides where you look, what you notice, what you fear, what you seek. Tells you what matters and what doesn't. Not through logic, but through invisible spatial orientation. And like any map, it was drawn. Drawn by repetition, drawn by trauma, drawn by myth, drawn by early feedback loops that told you where it was safe to think. And where it wasn't. Your internal cartography holds symbolic coordinates, places of expansion, contraction, resonance, resistance. These coordinates are not fixed. They're patterns, forms, emotional geometries wrapped around memory. And these patterns organize your perception. So when you feel lost, it's not metaphor, it's literal. Your internal map has collapsed or lost coherence. Let's explore how this map is formed. At the center lies the locus of self, the symbolic core that all other perceptions orbit. For some, this core is shaped like a fortress, rigid, defended, static. For others, it's a vortex, swirling, unstable, always seeking center. Others live from a hollow center, a symbolic vacuum, often experienced as numbness. Surrounding the center are narrative rings. These are timelines, identities, memory fields. Think of them as concentric circles holding different eras of symbolic charge. Each ring carries a frequency. Some are dense, filled with shame, contraction, unfinished emotion. Others are light, open, resonant, spacious. The more you identify with a ring, the more that frequency governs your perception. Outside the rings lies the boundary layer, the symbolic edge of the known self. This is where possibility meets resistance. This is where potential realities are either integrated or rejected. If your map's edge is too rigid, you may reject new data that doesn't match your current symbolic structure. If your map is too porous, you may absorb too much archetypal material without integration, leading to identity fragmentation. The key is symbolic coherence, not fixedness. Coherence allows flexibility without collapse, movement without confusion. It's what makes your internal map functional. Now look at the grid lines that run through the map. These are not physical lines, they're directional vectors. Lines of focus, lines of memory access, lines of attention. These grid lines organize perception. They dictate where you naturally orient, toward threat, toward affirmation, toward control, toward novelty. Each person has a unique grid line configuration, and that configuration shapes the emotional topography of your awareness. For example, a person with vertical dominant lines may be constantly comparing, measuring up or down. A person with spiral lines may loop experiences in recursive thinking. A person with fractured grid lines may feel disoriented in thought, speech, or focus. Recognizing your grid line configuration is essential to repatterning your symbolic terrain. So how does this map relate to daily experience? Let's say you enter a new environment. Before you interpret the space logically, your internal cartography scans it symbolically. Your map reads the shapes, the color tones, the spatial rhythm, and finds coordinates that either match or mismatch your internal grid. A mismatch may cause tension, not because the space is bad, but because it destabilizes your symbolic navigation. This is why some people feel disoriented in minimalism, others overwhelmed in chaos, others calm only in enclosure. The nervous system is reading the symbolic field for resonance with its internal map. Now reverse the lens. Your internal map also emits a signal. This signal, composed of emotional charge, symbolic density, and story pattern, attracts and organizes external experience. This is not mysticism. It's structural. If your internal map is shaped like a maze, life will present labyrinths. If your internal map is shaped like a battlefield, life will offer conflict. If your map is shaped like a sanctuary, life will respond accordingly. This is not the universe rewarding or punishing. It's symbolic mirroring structural resonance between inner map and outer field. So how do you begin to shift your cartography? First, you identify the terrain. Where is your attention most drawn? What areas feel foggy? Which memory corridors are accessible and which are blocked? This isn't therapy. It's cartographic analysis. You're not fixing emotion, you're tracing shape. Next, you examine your boundary layer. Where does your symbolic edge resist movement? Where does it collapse? What archetypal figures guard your threshold? These are not metaphors. They are structural signatures. Your boundary layer is shaped by archetype, often protective ones like the critic, the skeptic, the pleaser. Their placement reveals where your map has been locked. And then you begin to rewire, not by adding positive thoughts, but by reconstructing form. You can install symbolic pathways, new emotional corridors, new directional lines. This is what symbolic engineering makes possible. The ability to design awareness as space, to shape attention like terrain, to hold memory as geometry, and to live from a map you authored, not one drawn by accident, trauma, or inherited myth. Next, we will explore the original software behind the map itself, the mythic archetypes running silently in the background. Not characters, not tropes, but deep operating structures of the psyche that encode identity and decision. We move now into the realm of archetypal architecture. There is software running in the background of your mind. You didn't install it manually. You didn't consent to it consciously. It didn't come in a download folder or appear in a settings panel. It's ancient, it's mythic, and it's shaping your sense of self. These systems are not coded in letters or logic. They are woven into storylines, emotions, gestures, and social reflexes. They guide behavior without asking for permission. They speak through instinct and identity. These systems are called archetypes, and they are the original psychic architecture. An archetype isn't a character. It's not a hero or a villain, not a sage or a rebel. Those are masks. The true archetype lives deeper, in the symbolic structure beneath the mask. It's not the person in the myth. It's the myth that lives inside the person. An archetype is a symbolic code that orients perception, emotion, behavior, and belonging. It acts like a psychic template, a compressed program, a frequency-based blueprint that interprets experience before you even realize you're interpreting. Let's break this down further. Each archetype contains a core symbolic shape, a geometry that reflects its psychological stance, a narrative pattern, a repeating script that it performs across timelines, an emotional resonance, the frequency it imprints on experience, a set of values not spoken but encoded through what it prioritizes and avoids, a decision reflex, the automated choice pattern it favors. These combine to form what feels like you, your identity, your reactions, your emotional range. But in many cases, it's not really you. It's a symbolic loop, a performance nested in unconscious agreement. Consider the caretaker archetype. Its shape is outward and circular, it orbits others. Its narrative is sacrificial, support at the expense of self. Its emotional frequency is duty mixed with sublimated resentment. Its value is connection through service. Its reflex is to soothe, to rescue, to hold. This archetype often appears noble, and it can be, but when unconscious, it creates entrapment. Boundaries dissolve, identity merges with others, exhaustion becomes normalized. The story repeats, the shape thickens, until it's mistaken for personality. Or take the wanderer archetype. The shape is nonlinear, spiral, or fragmented. Its narrative is freedom over structure. Its emotional tone swings between wonder and disorientation. Its value is discovery through distance. Its reflex is to escape, to search, to avoid route. The wanderer, too, has beauty, creativity, novelty, insight, but when unconscious, it becomes a dispersal pattern. Direction collapses. The symbolic center is never claimed. Home becomes an abstraction. And again, the loop is mistaken for who I am. These archetypes are not chosen. They are inherited, absorbed, installed through repetition and cultural imprint. They are functional. They are efficient. They serve a purpose. But they are not absolute. And once they become default programs, Once they run silently in the background, they begin to filter possibility. Certain choices disappear. Certain thoughts feel inaccessible. Not because they're wrong, but because they don't match the archetype's internal code. This is why self-transformation often fails when it ignores archetypal software. Trying to build a new habit while running the same underlying archetype is like repainting a wall in a burning house. The shape hasn't changed. The code hasn't shifted. The pattern is still live, and it will eventually override the surface-level change. Symbolic engineering begins here, not in ideas but in archetypal detection. Start by tracing your dominant archetypes. You can do this by observing emotional patterns. What emotional frequency dominates your timeline? Is it striving, withholding, proving, pleasing, withdrawing? Each emotion is an echo of an archetype. A repeated mood is often an indicator of a dominant code. Next, trace your narrative loops. What roles do you replay in relationships? What identity scripts do you default to under stress? Where do your choices feel automatic, not from alignment but from obligation? These are archetypal reflexes. They're not broken. They're not flaws. They're just scripts, and scripts can be rewritten. One of the key insights in symbolic engineering is this: archetypes require architecture. They do not live in isolation. They require structure, internal space, symbolic shape, emotional resonance. That means when you shift your symbolic terrain, your archetypal programming begins to adapt. This is not about eliminating archetypes. That's impossible. It's about updating their form, reauthoring their function, rewiring their symbolic ecosystem so they serve, rather than override your awareness. Some archetypes can be integrated. Others must be released. Some can be elevated, recoded to operate at a higher symbolic frequency. The difference is in how you relate to them. Unconscious archetypes operate as identity. Conscious archetypes operate as tools. You become the conductor, not the puppet. Let's anchor this. Draw out your dominant archetypes as geometric shapes. Start with 3. The one you perform most often in relationships. The one you enact during solitude. The one that takes over during pressure. Assign each a symbolic shape, a form that reflects how it moves through your perception. Then, examine the tension between them. Do they align or contradict? Is your outer self in resonance with your inner self? Is your stress response compatible with your values? This analysis reveals symbolic incoherence, where your internal architecture is in conflict. You don't fix this with force. You refine it through symbolic realignment. You introduce shapes, patterns, rituals, or visual anchors that support coherence. You bring opposing archetypes into dialogue, not in story but in symbolic form. And in doing so, you transform identity from reflex into design. Next, we will trace the sensory memory embedded in this symbolic system, the color gradients, the shape imprints, and the spatial memories that hold emotion in place like frozen architecture. We move now into memory's visual curve. Memory is not a file. It's not a frozen image. It doesn't live in drawers or folders in your brain. It moves, curves. It loops through shape, sound, color, and sensation. Memory is a living architecture, a symbolic landscape with structure, rhythm, and form. And it doesn't play back like a film, plays forward like a resonance field. You don't remember moments. You remember meaning, encoded in form. Think of a strong memory right now. Not the factual sequence, but the actual feeling of it. That sensation you just touched? That's not words. That's color, space, and symbolic tension. Memory always rides a curve. It bends perception in its direction, which is why some memories trap you, and others become fuel. The difference is in their symbolic shape. Let's look deeper. Every memory that still holds emotional weight has a symbolic imprint. It exists as more than content. It exists as structure. Some are sharp. Others are wide. Some feel vertical, a rise and crash. Others flat, like a continuous static hum. These are symbolic geometries. They're not just emotional moods. They're codes etched into how the memory was perceived, stored, and reactivated. And these shapes define how you respond to the present. Memory doesn't just report the past. It overlays the now, colors perception. It adjusts your symbolic grid, tilting the angles of focus, compressing emotional range, freezing inner movement. For example, if a memory was encoded with a collapsed spiral, a feeling of diminishing power, then any new situation with similar cues will activate that spiral again. It's not the event repeating, it's the shape being triggered. This is how unconscious memory operates. Not through narrative, but through curvature and hue. To shift a memory, you don't have to change the story. You need to change the form. You need to redraw the architecture of how that memory lives inside your awareness. This is emotional geometry. It's the symbolic structure that gives memory its staying power. When emotion fuses with shape, a glyph is formed. That glyph embeds into your inner space. And until it is revised, it becomes part of your default signal. This is why letting go is often useless advice. You can't let go of a glyph that's still installed in your frequency architecture. You can't suppress a curve that still lives in your perceptual field. But you can revise it. You can trace it. You can translate it. You can shift its geometry until it no longer hijacks your timeline. Start here. Pick a recurring emotional memory. Something that resurfaces, uninvited. Do not tell the story of it. Do not analyze it. Instead, draw it. Let your hand sketch the shape it holds in your body. Don't aim for realism. Aim for resonance. Is it angular? Is it looping? Is it blurred at the edges? Does it rise or sink? Once you have that form, assign it a color. Not the color it was in the outer world, the color it holds emotionally. Let that color soak the shape. Now pause. And feel how your body responds to this visual glyph. You are holding a symbolic snapshot of your memory's architecture. Now adjust the form. Slowly begin to shift the shape. Stretch it. Open it. Round its corners. Add space. Remove compression. Brighten its edges. You are not fixing the memory. You are redesigning its architecture. And in doing so, you're rewriting the emotional frequency embedded within it. This is not visualization. This is symbolic recalibration. The power of this practice lies in bypassing the rational mind. You are not convincing yourself to feel differently. You are shifting the signal directly. And when the signal shifts, so does the emotional grip. This is the essence of symbolic engineering, accessing deep code through shape, not logic. Memory is not a timeline. It's a symbolic echo. Its resonance lives in the present. And it can be revised without destroying its truth, because what holds us captive is not the fact of the past, but the form in which we continue to carry it. Memory that loops is a shape unclosed. Memory that haunts is a glyph unprocessed. Memory that opens is a curve redesigned. Next, we will explore the syntax through which these shapes organize meaning, the layered structure of symbols that build nested reality frames. We now shift into the dimensional grammar beneath perception. Symbols do not live in isolation. They stack, they layer, they interact through patterns, through resonance, through nested meaning. This is not art theory. This is perception. Your awareness is not a flat screen. It is a multi-tiered architecture, a stack of symbolic constructs that form a cohesive, interpretable world. What you call reality is not raw data. It's a processed output. The input is symbolic. The logic you apply to life rests on a foundation of meaning structures, most of which you did not choose consciously. This foundation is called dimensional syntax. It is the unspoken grammar of your perception. It tells you what matters, what connects, what separates, what belongs inside a story and what stays out. It organizes your thoughts not by topic but by symbolic relation. Dimensional syntax is the rulebook your consciousness follows when assembling experience. Let's go deeper. Take the example of cause and effect. You experience one thing, then another. You interpret a relationship between them. This is not logic at work. It's symbolic stacking. You have stacked two symbols, an event and a response, into a vertical syntax structure, meaning above action. This stacking becomes habitual. It becomes belief. Soon, you don't just think this happened because of that. You feel it as truth, and that truth begins to define your reality boundary. Every belief lives inside a syntax stack. A symbolic frame sits at the bottom. An identity script rests on top of it. A set of values reinforce it. A loop of thoughts maintains it. A field of emotion coats it. These layers interact. If you try to change a belief by altering a thought, you're working at the top of the stack. But the base structure, the symbolic frame, stays the same, so the change doesn't hold. To shift reality perception, you must rework the base syntax. That means going to the root symbol and reconstructing how it stacks meaning. For example, let's say your base symbol is a tower. Tall, isolated, protective. It carries meanings: strength, separation, vigilance. Now stack identity on top. Independent, self-sufficient, invulnerable. Now stack values. Don't rely on others. Control everything. Never show weakness. Now stack thoughts. No one really understands me. I have to handle this alone. That's a vertical syntax stack built on a tower glyph. It's structurally coherent but emotionally isolating. And it will repeat until the base symbol is shifted. So how do you shift it? First, identify the base glyph running your stack. Is it a tower? A spiral? A cage? A labyrinth? Then ask, what meaning does that shape reinforce? What identity rests on top of it? What thoughts orbit around it? Now reverse the syntax. Introduce a new base glyph, say a bridge, a shape of connection, curved, open, stable. Let your emotional field adapt to this new symbol. Stack a new identity, open channel, connector, fluent boundary. Stack new values, mutual exchange, trusted flow, strength through alliance. Then new thoughts emerge naturally. This is how reality stacks shift, not through surface effort, but through structural resymbolizing. Dimensional syntax also governs time perception. Most people live in a linear stack, past below, present in the middle, future above. That stack can trap experience in single direction meaning. But symbolic fluency allows for alternative time syntax. Spiral stacks, where past and future meet cyclically. Grid stacks, where multiple timelines operate in parallel. Mirror stacks, where events reflect rather than lead into each other. Each syntax changes how you perceive causality, agency, and narrative resolution. Syntax is not decoration. It's foundation. When you shift your symbolic syntax, you change your ability to experience certain states. A person cannot feel free if they are stacked on a cage glyph, no matter how many affirmations they repeat. But the moment the symbolic base is swapped, even without changing any thoughts, freedom becomes accessible again. This is dimensional access through symbolic recoding. To begin rewriting your syntax, identify the symbolic base that organizes a recurring emotional state. Visualize it. Trace how identity, values, and thoughts stack on top. Introduce a new symbolic base, one that allows for the state you seek. Let the stack reorient organically. This is not fantasy. It's symbolic sequencing. It works because perception is not neutral. It is constructed, and you can reconstruct it once you see the structure. Next, we will examine how recurring symbolic forms create emotional resonance patterns, forming feedback loops that echo through thought, behavior, and inner space. We now turn to the frequency scaffolding of shape. Patterns don't just repeat, they resonate, they echo, not as ideas but as frequencies encoded in shape. Every recurring symbol in your life is more than visual. It's vibrational. It emits a rhythm, a pulse, a field, and that field scaffolds your perception. This is frequency scaffolding, the way symbolic forms embed themselves into your system and create consistent energetic architecture. Think of your consciousness as a chamber. The shapes within it determine how energy bounces, absorbs, reflects. Each repeated thought form adds another structural beam. Each unprocessed story adds another echo. Eventually, a framework is built, not randomly but symphonically. Every shape contributes to the tone of your field. This is why recurring challenges feel so precise. Why some emotional loops feel musical, like a sad song stuck on loop. They are built from symbolic patterns that emit frequencies. Not sound necessarily, but resonance. The shape determines the tone. Let's take an example. The triangle. When held in tension, it becomes a symbol of conflict. Two opposing forces pressing against a point of collapse. This shape shows up in emotional triangles, in decisions between two irreconcilable choices, in narratives of betrayal, pressure, urgency. Repeated enough, this triangle becomes more than metaphor. It becomes scaffolding. You start interpreting life through triangulated tension. Your nervous system becomes trained to expect it, and your awareness orients around it, not because it's destined, but because it's structured. This is not a pattern of failure. It's a frequency architecture waiting to be retuned. To change this, you don't need to destroy the triangle. You need to alter how it's wired into your internal structure. Maybe you soften one angle. You introduce a curve. You collapse one side to create flow. These are symbolic interventions, not mental gymnastics. When the structure shifts, the frequency does too, and the loop changes. All symbols emit a field. This field isn't mystical. It's perceptual. Your nervous system attunes to the shapes it recognizes and organizes emotional energy around them. This is why symbolic awareness is crucial. You are not simply reacting to events. You are harmonizing or clashing with the resonance fields built from your inner shapes. Some of those shapes were inherited. Some were built during stress. Others came through repetition, media, culture, relationships, and they formed a scaffold. Frequency scaffolding is not inherently negative. It allows for internal coherence. It helps your system operate efficiently, like architectural beams holding up a cathedral. But when the scaffolding is outdated or misaligned, it distorts. It creates energetic dead zones, places in your psyche where flow can't reach. That's when you feel stuck. Not because you're broken, but because the scaffolding no longer matches your current awareness. Symbolic engineering gives you access to the scaffolding itself. It lets you trace the shape behind the feeling, the form behind the thought, the architecture behind the emotion, and from there you can redesign. One new symbolic anchor can realign an entire resonance field. That's not exaggeration. It's structural logic. Just as adding a keystone transforms a vault, adding a new symbolic form into your awareness can shift your entire signal architecture. The key is intentionality. Which shape are you living from? And what new form wants to be installed? Frequency scaffolding isn't abstract. It shows up as mood, as instinct, as reaction. When you feel emotionally overpowered by something minor, you're feeling resonance amplification from your symbolic structure. When you feel strangely at peace in a new environment, you're matching a frequency you once knew, even if you can't name it. Symbols speak in signals before they form into thoughts. Your job is to learn the language, not of meaning, but of resonance. Trace the scaffolding, then rewire it. Next, we'll move into shape as feeling, how geometric intelligence isn't aesthetic but emotional. We now examine the architecture of emotion. Every emotion has form. It's not just a wave or a fog or a force. It's a structural event, a movement through internal space, a shape with memory and rhythm. The shape of the emotion determines how it moves, how it lands, how it resolves or doesn't. Understanding this is the doorway to emotional clarity that goes beyond regulation or repression. This is shape intelligence. Shape intelligence is the ability to feel with form, to recognize that emotion doesn't arrive randomly, but through geometric syntax. You've felt this before. Grief that spirals and tightens. Joy that radiates outward in expanding arcs. Anxiety that spikes and fractures like lightning. These aren't metaphors. They are actual signatures, shape codes embedded into the nervous system's emotional architecture. They are how your body maps emotion into internal terrain. When people say they feel stuck, they're describing structural congestion. The emotional shape cannot complete its cycle. It's looping inside an unfinished form. That loop could be a closed spiral with no release, could be a collapsed bridge with no resolution, could be a severed line, a signal that can't reconnect to its origin. In every case, the emotion is shaped, and the shape has gotten rigid. The key is not catharsis, it's architecture. Begin by locating the shape of your current dominant emotion. Don't name it, trace it. Where does it move in the body? Does it expand or contract? Does it move vertically, a rise and crash? Or horizontally, a spread and withdrawal? Is it a knot? A tunnel? A coil? Once you locate the shape, you can begin working with it, not to suppress but to shapeshift. That's the practice of emotional geometry. Let's say the shape you feel is a spiral pulling inward, a common pattern for shame or helplessness. You can't think your way out of that spiral. It exists at a structural level, but you can alter its shape. You can draw it, stretch it, breathe through it, not with the goal of erasing it, but expanding its structure until it finds a new pattern. This isn't bypassing, it's resculpting. Emotion is fluid until frozen. Shape intelligence melts the freeze. The more fluent you become in shape, the more precise your emotional awareness becomes. You stop saying vague things like, I feel off. You begin saying things like, there's a fractured horizontal line collapsing in the chest. Or, there's a compressed cube in the diaphragm trying to open from one corner. This isn't poetic indulgence. It's structural data, and your system responds to precision. With shape intelligence, you don't fight the feeling. You collaborate with it. You become an emotional architect, tracing the design, studying the tension points, finding where the energy is caught. And with enough skill, you begin to pre-shape emotion. You prepare your system to receive certain feelings through intentional shape design. This is not control. It's conscious structure. You're not overriding emotion. You're designing the space for it to move properly. Emotional maturity at this level isn't just about self-awareness. It's about shape fluency. And once mastered, it lets you respond to any feeling, not with panic or suppression, but with spatial clarity. You ask, what form is this? What's its architecture? Where is it incomplete? Then you finish the shape, and the emotion releases. Next, we'll examine the split between pure awareness and symbol, how signals get hijacked by false shape, and how to reclaim the raw source of perception. We now enter the territory of signal versus symbol. There's a fracture inside your awareness, not a wound, not a dysfunction, a split between signal and symbol, between what is and what has been shaped to seem. Understanding this split is essential, because unless you can separate raw signal from applied symbol, you'll keep living inside projections, mistaking inherited meaning for truth. Let's start with signal. Signal is direct. It's the pure pulse of awareness. It arrives before narrative, before interpretation, before emotional layering. It's the quiet flash, a flicker of knowing, not yet sculpted into form. Signal doesn't speak in language. It's prelinguistic. It's the energy of perception before it's organized. And then, almost instantly, it's wrapped in meaning, wrapped in shape, wrapped in symbol. This is where the split happens. Symbol steps in to help or to hijack. It offers structure. It offers story. It offers emotional scaffolding to make sense of the signal. And sometimes this is helpful. You feel a sensation, and the symbol helps orient it. This is intuition. This is excitement. This is grief. But often, the symbol applied is not your own. It's inherited from parents, from culture, from trauma, from mythologies you didn't consciously choose. And now the raw signal, once clear, is distorted. This distortion isn't malicious. It's structural. The moment the symbol is applied, it rewrites the signal's code. A subtle tension in the body becomes anxiety. A moment of stillness becomes laziness. A flicker of excitement becomes danger. Not because the signal changed, but because the symbol wrapped around it told a different story. This is how we lose access to direct perception. This is how the split deepens. Reconnecting to signal requires two skills: decoding the symbolic overlays that hijack your awareness, discerning the raw signal beneath them. This isn't analysis. It's precision perception. You trace the sensation before it becomes story. You pause at the moment of interpretation. And you ask, is this symbol accurate or automatic? Is this shape mine or installed? Let's say you feel a sudden drop in energy. The symbol you've inherited says, you're lazy, you're unproductive, something's wrong. But if you remove that symbol, what's left? Maybe the signal is asking for silence. Maybe it's a recalibration. Maybe it's not a problem, just a different frequency wanting space. By removing the false symbol, the signal becomes accessible again. The more you practice this, the clearer your perception becomes. You stop mistaking the overlay for the origin. You begin to feel life from the inside out, not through archetypes you absorbed, but through direct inner signal. This restores sovereignty, because now you are no longer shaped by old symbols. You are choosing in real time which symbols you apply, if any. The final mastery is to learn when to symbol and when to simply signal. Not every experience needs to be wrapped in meaning. Some need to stay raw, to be held without shape, without name. This is where awareness becomes lucid, where consciousness is no longer filtered, but freed. Next, we move into polarity, not as duality or division, but as a force of creation through symbolic tension. We now explore the field where opposites build worlds. Most people fear contradiction. They chase resolution. They seek clarity. But clarity doesn't always come from certainty. Sometimes it comes from tension, from symbolic polarity, from holding two opposing codes not as enemies, but as co-creators. Symbolic polarity is not confusion. It's structure. It's the architecture of energy that allows for meaning to expand. Every myth, every decision, every emotion worth remembering carries polarity at its core. Truth and illusion, expansion and contraction, autonomy and belonging, creation and destruction. These aren't mistakes. They are symbolic engines. Polarity creates friction, and friction generates signal. The mistake is assuming polarity is dysfunction. It isn't. It's design. Opposing symbols create the arc of experience. Without symbolic polarity, reality would flatten. Stories would disappear. Emotion would dissolve. You need the curve of tension to shape awareness. Let's look at how polarity structures identity. Take the symbol of the sovereign, the one who leads. Now introduce its polarity. The servant, the one who yields. If you over-identify with only one, imbalance sets in. Sovereign without servant becomes domination. Servant without sovereign becomes erasure. But when held together, a sovereign who serves, a new archetype emerges. Not a collapse, not a blur. A third structure born from tension. This is symbolic triangulation. When two poles are held with coherence, a third force appears: synthesis, creativity, insight. Not compromise, not neutrality, a higher order form. This is what ancient systems encoded through dual deities. Sacred unions, mirrored symbols. Polarity was not feared. It was sacred geometry. You carry multiple polarities in your symbolic field. Freedom and stability, depth and simplicity, visibility and mystery. When you suppress one, the field distorts. When you amplify both, your architecture becomes multidimensional. This is not a psychological trick. It's a symbolic upgrade. You are expanding the scaffolding of your mind to include more tension without collapse. That tension becomes design fuel. To apply this, identify a polarity you resist. Where do you push one side away? Ask, what symbol do I hold for each pole? Do they clash or complement? Can I re-symbolize them into new forms that coexist? This isn't theoretical. It's literal symbolic rewriting. You're turning conflict into construction. Polarity, when held skillfully, is power. It doesn't require solving. It requires presence. It doesn't force fusion. It allows resonance. And through that resonance, a new signal is born, a signal that carries more dimensional weight than either symbol alone. This is the art of symbolic expansion, holding form, and its opposite, until something truer arises. Next, we step into the experiential body, where these symbols are not just seen or named, but felt, moved, and installed through somatic technique. We begin with breath as glyph. Breath is not neutral. It is not mechanical. It is not background. Breath is a glyph, a living symbol tracing form through your inner world with every cycle. And most have forgotten how to read it. Each inhale draws a curve. Each exhale completes the loop. Together, they form a living geometry, one that reflects your current signal architecture. When your breath is sharp and segmented, your internal structure is likely jagged. When your breath is shallow and stuck, your inner glyphs are compressed. When your breath is wide and open, symbolic space expands within you. This is not poetic metaphor. This is structural reading. Your breath draws your glyph over and over again on the canvas of your body. So let's start tracing. Close your eyes, but not to escape, to enter. Bring attention to the breath without trying to modify it. Simply observe its shape. Where does it begin? How far does it travel? Where does it stop? Most will find it cuts off midway, stuck in the ribs, clamped in the belly, restrained behind the heart. These are blocked glyphs, signal interruptions caused by past structure, collapsed architecture where the breath can no longer move freely. We're not fixing that. We're drawing through it. Begin to breathe with shape awareness. Inhale as if tracing a rising arc, not upward as an effort but outward as an expansion. Exhale as if drawing a soft spiral downward, not collapsing, but settling. Feel how the body responds. The breath is now a symbol, not just a function. You're using breath to reshape internal space. With each cycle, the glyph becomes more coherent. Try shifting the shape. A triangle. Inhale into the base, hold at the peak, exhale down one side. A circle. Continuous, connected, seamless. A wave. Inhale as lift, exhale as crest and release. Notice how each shape produces a different emotional resonance. Some will calm, some will energize, some will reveal. This is breath-based symbolic encoding. Now we bring in attention, not mental effort, symbolic presence. Direct your awareness like a stylus sketching the breath as form inside the body. Visualize the glyph you are tracing. Breathe it into the chest, the spine, the hips. Let the symbol root itself through repetition. This isn't about control. It's about imprint. You're drawing a new glyph into the somatic field, one breath at a time. Over time, certain breath glyphs will emerge as personal anchors. They'll show up when the mind is overwhelmed. They'll return during sleep or meditation. They'll appear uninvited because the body recognizes them as stabilizers. You've installed shape intelligence into breath. You've turned respiration into a symbolic practice. This is where symbolic engineering becomes physical. The breath is not merely reacting to stress or emotion. It's redesigning them. You're moving from being shaped by experience to shaping the space where experience happens. That's not visualization. That's structural authorship. Next, we extend this awareness to the self-image, to the visual form of your symbolic identity. You are not just a person. You are a symbol in motion. Your identity is a living glyph, constructed from memory, emotion, shape, and story. But most only see their reflection through the lens of social feedback, not symbolic structure. That changes here. Welcome to the mirror room, not a literal space, but a field, a dimensional interface where you face the symbolic self directly. The one beneath your personality. The one shaped by hidden geometry. The one that has always been drawing you from behind your eyes. Begin here. Visualize a space clear, undefined, weightless. This is the mirror room. Now bring your attention to its center. You are standing there not as your physical body, but as your symbolic imprint. Your glyph, let it appear without force. What shape begins to take form? It may be humanoid. It may be abstract. It may be made of color, line, or light. Let the symbolic self arise from signal. Now study it. How tall is it? What's its structure? Sharp, fluid, angular, symmetrical? What materials is it made of? Stone, glass, mist, metal, fire? What emotional resonance does it emit? Calm, grief, hunger, stillness? This is not visualization for fantasy. It's architectural recognition. You are seeing the shape your consciousness currently occupies. Now look deeper. Trace the symbols carved into the form. These may appear as glyphs, color bands, textures, or motion patterns. They are not decorative. They are data. Each represents a narrative loop, a belief cluster, an identity contract. You are decoding the symbology of your current self-image. Not by analyzing, but by seeing. By reading the form like a sculptor reads stone. Now take one step closer to this symbolic self. Notice how it reacts. Does it move, mirror you, resist? This is the field of resonance. Your inner architecture responds to your attention. If there is distortion, observe it. If there is avoidance, honor it. If the symbol collapses, witness the breakdown without rushing to fix. You are holding your current glyph in conscious awareness. That act alone begins the redesign. Now ask, is this the form you want to live from? Not as an ideal, not as perfection, but as symbolic coherence. If the answer is no, trace what's missing. Where is space needed? Where is flexibility required? What shapes want to be removed, softened, restructured? Then gently, breath by breath, begin to shift the form. Not for beauty, not for power, for resonance. Let a new glyph take shape. Maybe the spine straightens into a pillar of light. Maybe the chest expands with a ring of gold. Maybe the limbs radiate with mirrored symmetry. You are not imagining. You are remembering a deeper blueprint. And your body feels it. Symbolic shifts in the mirror room echo into posture, speech, decision. Because you are not changing the surface. You are redrawing the architecture that perception lives through. Once this form stabilizes, offer it a symbol, one central glyph to represent the new state. Hold it in your palm. Place it in your chest. Let it spiral behind your eyes. This is your current symbolic signature. A living imprint of design. Not locked, not final, but chosen. Return to the mirror room often. Not to fix, to witness, to redesign. To remember that the you experience is not fixed. It's structured, and structure can evolve. Next, we move into the field of narrative design, where myth and map converge to reveal the story your life is tracing beneath the surface. We now begin mapping the mythos field. You are inside a myth, not a metaphor, not a fantasy, a structural storyline, composed of symbolic coordinates that silently direct your choices, moods, and timelines. This storyline is not visible in your calendar or resume. It doesn't live in your memories directly. It lives in the mythos field, and today we begin mapping it. The mythos field is a symbolic layer of consciousness. It holds the archetypal scripts you've absorbed, not as entertainment but as identity blueprints. These scripts run underneath behavior. They define what roles you believe you must play, what challenges you expect to face, and what outcomes feel deserved or realistic. Until this myth is made visible, it shapes your perception without your consent. And while you may change environments, jobs, or habits, the story persists. The question is not, what do I believe? The real question is, what myth am I still inside? To answer that, we begin with symbolic pattern recognition. Start with repetition. Where do events seem to circle back? Do you attract the same types of conflict? Do your relationships follow familiar arcs? Is there a recurring sensation of pursuit, failure, rescue, exile, return? These loops aren't random. They're narrative glyphs. Next, Identify the symbolic tone of your life story. Is it tragic, heroic, cyclical, romantic, exilic? Don't judge, just witness. This tone reveals the atmospheric quality of your mythos field, the emotional whether your consciousness lives inside. You may find that your life reflects a fragmented myth, a partial arc, a broken journey, a quest without a return. This is not failure. The signal. Your myth is incomplete, and the psyche wants resolution. Now identify your character positioning. What role do you unconsciously play? Hero, martyr, observer, outsider, seeker? This is your symbolic placement, the position you feel assigned rather than chosen. And it holds enormous gravitational pull, because identity scripts aren't just mental. They're mythic coordinates inside the field. They shape which opportunities register as possible, which people feel safe, which emotions feel in character. This is how the myth maintains itself through symbolic coherence. Once identified, the map can be drawn. On one side, the dominant myth you've been living. On the other, the myth that wants to emerge. This isn't fantasy. It's energetic alignment with new narrative frequency. Your task is not to choose a better story. Your task is to make space for symbolic migration, to move from one mythos field to another without collapse. This takes precision. You begin the shift not by rewriting the plot, but by changing the roles. If you've been cast as the outsider, re-symbolize yourself as the edgewalker, the bridge keeper, the translator between worlds. If you've been caught in the martyr glyph, shift into the flame bearer, the one who transforms sacrifice into illumination. These aren't motivational slogans. They are recalibrated archetypal functions. And once recoded, they alter your timeline's scaffolding. The mythos field doesn't resist change. It resists incoherence. If you shift the story without adjusting its symbols, the system rejects the update. But when the symbolic structure is aligned, the storyline begins to self-organize around the new archetype. You're not forcing new behavior. You're inhabiting a new glyph. Next, we'll enter the terrain of emotion through color, how feeling becomes geometry, and how coded hues reveal unconscious decisions. We now begin emotional geometry through chromatic decoding. Color is not decoration. The signal. It speaks in frequencies, not words. It moves through your perception field, silently encoding emotion, memory, and meaning into form. And whether you realize it or not, you're responding to these codes every moment. Each color carries a symbolic weight, not only visually, but emotionally. Red is not simply passion. Blue is not just calm. These are oversimplified labels. In reality, color is multidimensional. It shifts based on tone, texture, contrast, saturation, rhythm. And in your inner field, it becomes geometry, a vibrational pattern that holds emotional imprint. This is emotional geometry through color field mapping. Begin by recalling a recent emotional experience, one that lingers in your body. Rather than naming the feeling, bring your focus to the imagery it carries. What color tone surrounds it? Is it matte or luminous, opaque or translucent, solid or fractured? This visual data reveals the symbolic shape of the emotion. And once seen, it becomes actionable. Let's say the emotion carries a dense, muddy green, flat edges, compressed texture. This may indicate unresolved tension related to stored anger or blocked expression. Now let's say it's a washed-out pastel blue, but fragile, easily disrupted. That might reflect a state of emotional dissociation, masked calm, or boundary diffusion. You are reading the color as code, not as mood, but as structural data. To work with this, draw the color field of your current emotional state. Use shape, hue, pressure, and layering. Don't aim for realism, aim for resonance. You are creating a glyph of your feeling in chromatic language. Now study the shape. Is it expanding or compressing? Does it hold its form or bleed into edges? Is it harmonious or dissonant? This is your emotional geometry. It shows you how your inner space is arranged not through concept, but through frequency. Next, introduce a new color field, not to replace the first, but to inform it. Ask, what color do I need? But resist, which hue would introduce coherence? Now overlay it. Let the two fields interact not as a blend but as dialogue. This creates chromatic polarity, a tension that leads to symbolic transformation. You'll feel it viscerally, as if the body suddenly inhales space. This practice isn't abstract. It teaches your nervous system a new symbolic alphabet. You're training your awareness to interpret emotional tone as visual structure. And this enables recalibration without suppression. You no longer need to manage emotions. You read them, you shape them, you design their field to allow flow. Color reveals where your story is stuck. It shows you which symbols are dominant and which are missing. Over time, you'll begin to see emotional loops not as internal failures, but as incomplete palettes. Your role is to complete the design, to finish the emotional architecture, to bring color into coherence. Next, we move from inner perception to inner sound, decoding the tonal gradients and encrypted landscapes within your auditory field. We now begin sensory encryption and sound mapping. Close your eyes. Listen not to the outer world but the inner terrain. There is sound beneath thought, not noise, not words. A tonal field, layered, encrypted, structural. This is your internal sound architecture, and every layer holds a map. Your consciousness isn't silent. It hums. It pulses with tones you've stopped noticing, auditory fragments of emotion, memory, shape, and tension. These tones are not auditory hallucinations. They are perceptual frequencies coded into your internal space. Most people call this intuition or atmosphere, but in symbolic engineering we call it the encrypted tone field. This field is not background ambience. Its structure tells you where you are inside yourself. And when you begin to listen to it with symbolic ears, you can decode the language of inner space. Start here. Listen for the hum behind your thoughts, the one that's always there, underneath language. Is it high-pitched or low? Is it steady or wavering? Is it organic or synthetic in texture? This isn't imagination. You're tuning into the subconscious field of signal resonance, the tonal layer that reveals how your nervous system is interpreting the moment. That tone is encrypted with shape, color, memory, and emotional charge. Your job is to trace the code. Let's say your tone field is dense and metallic, like machinery. That may indicate cognitive overclocking or structural rigidity in emotional patterning. Or maybe your tone is muffled, underwater, distant. This suggests suppressed grief or disconnection from symbolic coherence. The tone doesn't lie. It's not filtered by language or persona. It's the raw auditory output of your current architecture. Now begin to map. Using your breath as a stabilizer, isolate the dominant tone. Give it shape. Does it vibrate outward in pulses? Does it curl in on itself like a coil? Is it fragmented, layered, echoing? Now listen for contrast. What tones are missing? Is there space for silence? Do higher registers feel safe to access? This is sound-based symbolic mapping. You are locating structural data in your inner acoustics. This has profound implications. When your tone field is overloaded with resonance mismatch, conflicting internal symbols, clashing narratives, unresolved shapes, distortion arises. Distortion creates static. Static clouds decision. Clouded decisions reinforce symbolic incoherence. That's how feedback loops begin. But when you clear the tone field, when you tune it with symbolic precision, clarity returns. You're not thinking better. You're hearing cleaner. So how do you tune? You introduce a primary tone glyph. This is a tonal anchor, a sound or internal vibration that your system recognizes as stabilizing. Could be a hum, a deep breath with sound, a tonal vowel, mmm, ah, oh, that aligns with your current emotional architecture. Let this tone echo through your inner space, not to fill it, to clarify it. Let it bounce off the glyphs inside you. Feel which areas amplify, which muffle, which ignore. You are scanning your inner terrain through sound. and each response reveals shape memory. Over time, you'll begin developing a tonal lexicon. Sounds that soften fear, sounds that stabilize vision, sounds that collapse looping thought forms. Each becomes a symbolic tool, not musical but architectural. This is sound mapping. It's not performance. It's signal engineering. Your voice is a tuning instrument, not just for speech, for symbolic coherence. When used with awareness, your voice can realign internal space. Not by speaking your truth, but by toning your structure. The tone is the truth before words arrive. Learn to hear it, then shape with it. Next, we move through space itself, walking the spiral geometry of time to rethread memory, anticipation, and symbolic direction. We now enter the spiral walk. You are not dreaming stories. You are receiving symbols. Nighttime is not just rest, it is transmission. And every dream holds glyphs. Living codes encrypted in narrative, shape, and emotion. To the untrained mind, these symbols appear as chaos, absurdity, or forgettable fragments. But to the symbolic engineer, the dream becomes a data stream, a mythic interface where unconscious architecture reveals its current structure. This is not analysis, it's extraction. Dreams speak in shape logic. The mind's architecture loosens. The gate of the conscious self dissolves. And what remains is pure symbol flow, unfiltered, nonlinear, layered. Each element in the dreamscape is not a character or object. It's a glyph, a living form representing pattern, frequency, or distortion. Your task is not to interpret these glyphs through conventional meaning. Your task is to extract them from the noise and listen to their architecture. Let's begin with the dream field itself. First, track the setting, not the visual details, but the spatial logic. Was it open or enclosed? Dim or luminous? Layered or flat? Each of these spatial qualities holds symbolic weight. A high ceiling may indicate expanded perception. A narrow hallway may point to restricted narrative. A dream without sky may reflect sealed timelines. This is structural resonance, not metaphor. You're decoding your current signal map by how your unconscious creates space. Now turn to the objects or figures. Not their identities, their form. Were they symmetrical? Did they dissolve or persist? Did they echo a color or shape from waking life? These are your glyphs. They are symbols trying to complete a message through structure. Do not name them. Trace them, visualize them, let them exist without narrative dressing. Now breathe into the glyph. Let its edges sharpen. Let its color deepen. Let its motion clarify. This is glyph stabilization. You're bringing unconscious data into symbolic focus. From here, observe its emotional tone. Not just what it means, but what it feels like in the nervous system. A dream glyph may hold sorrow in the form of a slow, melting blue, or rage as a pulsing red geometric fracture, or longing as a glass spiral extending upward. Again, not metaphor, form, encoded resonance. You are now reading dreams as shape-based emotional intelligence. What do you do with the glyph? You extract it, not to understand it, to install it consciously. You bring it into waking awareness as a visual, tonal, and spatial anchor. Sketch it. Breathe through it. Hold it in your palm in meditation. Ask it to reveal its function, not its story. You may find that a certain glyph from your dream stabilizes your voice, or changes how you walk, or dissolves a recurring tension in your relationships. Because it was never about the dream. It was about the glyph trying to reach you. The more fluently you extract and work with dream glyphs, the more your unconscious recalibrates. Dreams become clearer. Symbols organize themselves with greater coherence. Night becomes a ritual of repatterning. You stop processing and begin designing even while asleep. This is symbolic dreamcraft. It doesn't require control. It requires reception. Before sleep, create a glyph gateway. A simple image, a shape, a sound, a movement that you use to anchor your dream frequency. It tells your symbolic field, I am open. Send structure. This becomes a ritual, not for lucid dreaming, for glyph reception. And each morning the work continues, extracting, stabilizing, encoding. Next, we move from dream to narrative, rewriting the memory-embedded identity scenes that define perception from behind the veil. We now enter the inner theater. You are not the main character of your life. You are the director, the set designer, the scene builder. But most have forgotten that. They're trapped inside a script they didn't write, reacting to scenes installed before memory. This is the inner theater. And today we begin the architect's cut. Your identity is a cinematic sequence. It contains key scenes, emotionally charged, symbolically loaded, spatially etched. These scenes don't live in the past. They live in the now, on loop, like a projector hidden behind your thoughts. Each time you feel triggered, lost, small, overreactive, you've re-entered a scene. Not metaphorically, structurally. Your nervous system has dropped into a symbolic theater set. The props are invisible. The emotions are rehearsed. And the outcome is predictable, unless you rewrite it. Begin by identifying your origin scene, the one that feels foundational. You don't need clear memory, just sensation. Locate a moment in your body's emotional history that feels central, not for what happened, but for the shape it left inside you. It may feel like a collapse in the chest, a freeze in the throat, a narrowing of vision. This is where the theater lives. Now reconstruct it, not to relive, to reframe. Visualize the stage. Where are you in the scene? What's the spatial configuration? Who else is present? Not as characters, but as symbols. Is there a corner you're trapped in? A spotlight that distorts? A silence that reverberates too loudly? This is symbolic architecture. You're tracing the structural elements of the emotional scene. Now pause it. Step off stage. You are no longer the actor. You are the architect. From this vantage, begin the cut. Adjust the lighting. Widen the walls. Add symbolic allies, not people, but forms. A pillar of clarity, a mirror of truth, a glyph of protection. Change the stage. Let it match your current frequency, not your childhood encoding. Now watch the scene again, not from inside it, from above it. Let it run with new architecture. See how the movement shifts. This is narrative simulation through symbolic revision. When the scene completes, seal it with a new symbol. Place it where the old tension lived. In the diaphragm, behind the sternum, in the space between thoughts. Let it hum there for a while. Let it send new structure backward into memory and forward into choice. Because once a scene is rewritten symbolically, the timeline realigns. Not because the past changed, but because the geometry did. This simulation can be used for more than healing. You can use it to pre-structure future scenes, interviews, conversations, transitions. Design the inner set. Install coherent symbolic forms. Let the nervous system rehearse alignment. And then, when the real moment arrives, you're not reacting. You're stepping into a scene you've already designed. This is inner authorship. It's not fantasy. The symbolic fluency in real time. Next, we step into the written glyph, journaling not as reflection, but as shape-based emotional encoding. We begin the practice of symbological journaling. Most journaling is linear, a record, a release, a reflective log of events or thoughts. But that kind of journaling rarely rewires anything. It recycles, because language alone doesn't reshape symbolic structure. To shift identity, perception, and pattern, your writing must become something else. It must become glyph. Symbological journaling is not storytelling. It is transmission. Each sentence is a signal. Each paragraph a portal. Each page a field of layered emotional architecture. You are not writing what happened. You are writing the symbolic form through which it happened, and through which it can be rewritten. Start with silence. Not to empty yourself, but to locate the dominant signal in your system. Is there a specific emotional loop that wants form? A tension in the body asking to be shaped? A story fragment demanding release? Name nothing yet. Breathe. Let the shape emerge. Now begin to write, not as narrative but as code. Here's how. Start with the geometry of the emotion. Describe it as structure. This feeling is a narrowing spiral. It folds in on itself. It moves like dust falling in reverse. Avoid labels. Stay with shape. Next, shift into resonance description. What tone does it carry? Sharp, soft, electric, muffled? Let the tone inform the pacing of your writing. Short sentences for fragmentation. Long, spiraled syntax for fluidity. You are syncing your writing to the frequency of what you're witnessing. Then move into symbolic extraction. Let an image surface, not a metaphor, but a glyph. A mask, a door, a broken wheel, a melting crown. Write directly from that image. Let it speak in first person. Let it explain what it represents. You are now decoding the subconscious through symbol, bypassing analysis entirely. And what emerges is not content. It's architecture. This is where the recoding begins. Once the glyph is extracted and stabilized in language, shift its shape through the writing itself. Reframe the image by adding dimensions. If the wheel was broken, does it start spinning again? If the crown melted, what rises in its place? This isn't fiction. It's symbolic authorship. Each revision updates the signal structure of the memory or pattern. Finally, seal the writing with a glyph key. This is a word, shape, or phrase that captures the revised frequency. Examples: cracked open sky, silver line through ash, structure in stillness. Write it at the end and let it echo forward into your next decisions. The journal becomes a portal, not a diary, a design document for identity coherence. Do this practice regularly, not to track thoughts, to track structure. You'll begin to see patterns in your symbolic field. Recurring forms, tonal cycles, repeating shapes. Your subconscious becomes legible. And once legible, it becomes rewirable. Next, we move into spatial mythmaking, designing the architecture of your consciousness as an inner temple encoded with archetypal memory and narrative precision. We now begin the construction. You are living inside architecture, not just your home, your city, or your workspace. You are moving through symbolic rooms inside your awareness, shaped by memory, belief, archetype, and emotional tone. This space is not abstract. It is structural, and you can design it. Spatial mythmaking is the practice of constructing an internal symbolic environment, a temple, sanctuary, cathedral, or chamber that holds and reflects your deepest self-signal. This is not visualization for escape. It's architectural alignment, a symbolic container for your awareness to return to coherence, especially when the outer world fragments it. Start with the foundation. What kind of inner space wants to be built? Is it enclosed or open? Above or below ground? Organic or geometric? Don't decide with logic. Let the symbolic blueprint arrive through sensation. Once the general structure is felt, begin placing archetypal elements. Each one corresponds to a part of your inner system: a column for clarity, a pool for memory, a spiral staircase for vision, a doorway for transformation. These aren't visual props. They're functional symbols. You are placing memory holders and energy conductors into your psychic structure. Now choose the material of your temple. Is it stone, crystal, flame, ice, light, wood, cloud? Each carries a frequency. Each speaks to a dominant tone in your system. Maybe the walls are obsidian for protection. Maybe the ceiling is gold thread, woven from your future timeline. Maybe the floor is mirror, so you always walk on self-reflection. You are building with mythic material. This isn't fantasy. It's symbolic field engineering. Inside this temple, you install rooms or zones, each one designed for a purpose: an ancestral archive, a decision chamber, a healing basin, a command center, a throne. Let the symbolic utility of each room emerge through practice. Visit them when decisions feel unclear, when energy feels fragmented, when your outer environment is destabilizing your field. The temple becomes your internal architecture of resilience. Over time, the temple begins to evolve. It may expand, gain new wings, open into gardens, reveal hidden staircases, This is not your imagination running wild. It is your subconscious reorganizing itself through symbol. You are giving form to frequencies that were previously formless. And the result is dimensional coherence. To maintain the temple, use ritual. Enter it regularly, even briefly, and walk its halls. Adjust what needs shifting. Cleanse what feels dense. Add light, sound, scent, movement, symbolically or through physical anchoring. This internal design begins to reflect outward. Your choices change. Your environment adjusts. You begin arranging your physical life as a reflection of your inner temple. This is alignment through symbolic form. Spatial mythmaking turns your awareness into a sanctuary, not from pain, but for power. It's not a fortress to hide in. It's a structure to radiate from, a signal tower, an energetic landmark, a place where your true symbolic frequency can anchor and broadcast. Next, we shift into symbolic integration, applying shape, story, and identity to the daily fabric of reality. We begin with time as architecture. Time isn't passing, it's stacking. Your days aren't a line, they are layers. Narratives placed on top of narratives. Events glued together by symbolic logic. Sequences arranged by internal architecture, not objective chronology. This is not poetic language. This is how your reality is built. Most people think time is a string, one moment after another, endlessly pulling forward. But your system doesn't experience time that way. You experience time symbolically, by shape, by mood, by narrative. A moment that feels identical to a past experience doesn't just resemble it, it collapses into it. The layers of your timeline slide together like transparent sheets. That's why you react so strongly in certain situations. It's not the present event. It's the stack it sits on. Each narrative has a structural weight. Some are tall, built over years. Others are thin, fragile, easy to collapse. Some tilt, leaning into other narratives for support. Some are sealed, locked beneath denial or trauma. These narrative blocks create your internal architecture of time. And when something new happens, your system scans the structure to determine where it fits. If it doesn't fit, it's rejected. If it echoes a known shape, it gets fast-tracked into the stack, whether it belongs or not. This is how old stories persist. Not because they're true, but because they've been structurally rehearsed. They've become timeline keystones. To shift your future, you don't just change your goals. You change the architecture of the narrative layers that lead to them. You remove collapsed beams. You replace foundational glyphs. You install coherent scaffolding. This is timeline engineering through symbolic awareness. Start by tracing your dominant narrative shape. Is it a loop, a spiral, a staircase, a bridge with a missing plank? Each shape reveals how you experience movement through time. For example, a loop suggests unresolved sequence, where no event feels fully complete. A staircase implies progression, but may also suggest effort without rest. A broken bridge may reflect fear of future continuity. Your shape is not your fate, it's your structure, and it can be reshaped. To shift the stack, identify a recurring event pattern, a sequence that replays in different forms. Don't analyze the people or details. Extract the symbolic structure. Then locate which layer of your inner architecture it belongs to. Where is it stored? How much weight does it carry? Now create a new symbolic layer, not as a fantasy, but as a structural alternative. Visualize inserting this layer into the stack. Let it reorient the weight above and below it. You're not erasing the past. You're stabilizing the sequence. This form of symbolic integration reshapes your sense of past, present, and potential. You stop fearing repetition because repetition is no longer collapse. It becomes recursion with progression. You stop forcing new timelines because you're stacking new coherence, not resisting old layers. Time becomes something you shape, not chase. Next, we trace how emotional loops are seeded by symbolic implants, cultural or inherited narratives that bind attention in recursive resonance. We begin the study of symbolic imprinting and emotional looping. Your emotional responses are not all yours. They carry fingerprints, imprints, residual shapes installed long ago, not through personal experience, but through symbolic repetition. These are symbolic implants, and they create emotional loops that run silently, often mistaken for personality, fate, or flaw. A symbolic imprint is a form, not an idea, but a pattern that installs itself into your perception field through repetition, story, trauma, or cultural exposure. Could be a family story that teaches love equals sacrifice, a film that encoded worthiness through pain, a religion that fused divinity with shame, a national myth that shaped identity through struggle. These symbols become emotional defaults, and once installed, they echo. Echoes become loops. Loops are emotional states that repeat not because of external events, but because the symbolic structure keeps rerouting signal back to the same glyph. Here's how it works. You feel a spark of experience. The symbol attached to that feeling gets activated. That symbol triggers a pre-coded emotion. That emotion locks into narrative. And that narrative circles you back to the start. It feels spontaneous, but it's rehearsed, symbolically rehearsed. For example, if you carry a symbolic imprint that success equals isolation, then each step toward growth may unconsciously trigger loneliness. Not because anything is wrong, but because the symbol has embedded emotional reflex. Until that imprint is revealed and redesigned, it controls the loop. You can't outthink it. You have to rewrite its shape. Start by tracing a dominant emotional loop, one that appears across different seasons, relationships, or roles. Identify the moment the loop begins, not the trigger, but the first symbolic cue. Maybe it's a tone of voice, a change in light, a number on a screen, a specific phrase. That cue activates the glyph. Now study the shape of the glyph. Is it rigid? Does it pull you inward? Does it spike? Does it smother? This is your imprint. Next, create a symbolic inversion. This is not about logic, it's about resonance. You find a new glyph that disrupts the emotional algorithm. If the original symbol contracts, the new one expands. If the old shape hides, the new one reveals. If the loop spirals inward, the new symbol opens into a sphere. Introduce the new glyph when the loop starts. Place it mentally in your field, above the chest, behind the eyes, under the ribs. Let it become a signal interference. Not to erase the emotion, but to realign it. Over time, the loop loses power. Not because the old symbol disappears, but because it no longer dominates the sequence. You've created a structural alternative, and the nervous system will begin choosing it, not through force but familiarity. Symbolic imprinting is undone not by resistance but by replacement. You introduce new forms with stronger resonance. Eventually, those forms become the new defaults. The loops don't define you. They inform you until you inform them back. This is symbolic authorship. It's not reactivity. It's reconstruction. Next, we turn to identity itself, not as a singular name, but as a prism of archetypal echoes, shaped and coordinated through symbolic awareness. We begin the exploration of the identity prism. You are not one self. You are a prism, a multi-angled, refracting structure of symbolic roles, emotional facets, and narrative echoes. Each angle catches light differently. Each refraction performs a specific version of you. Each identity fragment speaks with its own emotional geometry. And unless seen clearly, these selves begin to conflict, overlap, or distort one another. The myth of the singular identity is seductive, promises clarity, simplicity, a clean answer to the question, who am I? But that clarity is often purchased by suppressing other aspects of the prism. You begin to live from a narrow beam, a symbolic tunnel, ignoring the angles that don't fit the dominant narrative. The result is inner war, not because you're fragmented, but because your inner symbolic ecology is misaligned. Every self-state you express carries a symbolic configuration. It includes an emotional tone, a posture or voice pattern, a glyph of identity, a behavioral script, a role in the current myth line, These are not just moods. They are full symbolic nodes, micro-archetypes operating semi-independently. When they're unaware of each other, chaos erupts. When they're coordinated, coherence emerges. Start by identifying 3 dominant self-angles. The one that appears in performance or public interaction. The one that surfaces in solitude. The one that activates under pressure. Don't describe them with adjectives. Map them symbolically. What shape are they? What color? What motion pattern? What myth are they living inside? You are beginning to diagram your identity prism. Next, observe their compatibility. Are they in resonance? Do they share values, emotional rhythms, narrative logic? Or do they contradict, pulling your attention in opposing directions? This is the prism tension. It's not pathology. The symbolic design waiting to be restructured. To restructure, bring the 3 angles into symbolic dialogue. Visualize them in a shared space. Let them speak not in language but through movement, shape, tone. Maybe the public self is angular, sharp, defensive. Maybe the private self is spherical, fluid, evasive. Maybe the pressure self is metallic, fast, reactive. Let their interactions show you the internal power dynamics. Then, begin installing a new coordination glyph. This glyph acts like a prism socket, a structure that can hold multiple selves in aligned tension. It might look like a tetrahedron, a mirrored sphere, a nested spiral tower. Whatever the form, it must hold multiplicity without collapse. Place that glyph into your symbolic body behind the sternum at the solar plexus or floating just behind the head. Let it stabilize the field. Over time, the different identity fragments begin to align their signals. You'll notice shifts in reaction time, voice, attention, and emotional clarity. You're not becoming oneself. You're becoming a structured prism, fluently shifting form without distortion. This is multidimensional coherence. Next, we shift from structure to narrative, reversing symbolic storylines to unlock hidden momentum and future signal potential. We begin the myth line reversal protocol. You have been walking forward while pulling a story behind you, and that story is heavier than you think. Not because of what it contains, but because of how it's shaped your sense of motion. It loops, it drags, it distorts direction, and it can be reversed, not erased, reversed. This is the myth line reversal protocol, a symbolic practice for shifting momentum by inverting internal narrative structure. A myth line is the symbolic storyline your psyche has been using to organize time. It has a beginning, usually marked by a rupture, a wound, or a choice. It has a core arc, often unspoken but deeply rehearsed. And it has an implied ending, even if it hasn't arrived yet. Most myth lines are inherited, passed down from ancestral memory, cultural narrative, or collective trauma. They are not fiction. They are symbolic timelines that shape how you expect events to unfold. And until they're reversed, they remain predictive. To begin reversal, locate the start point, not the event. The first symbolic moment when the timeline took root. Could be a scene where you felt abandoned, chosen, cast out, exalted, betrayed, unseen. Feel where it lives in the body. Now identify the symbolic shape of that moment. Was it a doorway closing? A fall from height? A room becoming dark? A voice silencing yours? That shape has been guiding your movement forward. Now freeze the myth line. Don't move forward. Turn around. Begin walking backward through the story, not literally, but symbolically. Re-see each key point in reverse. The climax becomes a contraction. The midpoint becomes a reveal. The origin becomes a choice point. And at each step ask, what glyph was installed here? What shape still echoes? What frequency still runs? You're not just reviewing memory. You're de-threading the symbolic timeline. Then reverse the shapes. Where there was collapse, install expansion. Where there was silence, install echo. Where there was exile, install return. You're not forcing a new story. You're rebalancing the energetic architecture of the old one. This rewrites perception at the structural level. The timeline loosens. New future directions become accessible, ones that were previously locked behind old shapes. Seal the reversal with a visual glyph, a symbol that represents closure with inversion. This could be a loop untied, a spiral reversed, a mirrored staircase with an open door at the bottom. Breathe into it. Let it anchor in the body. That symbol becomes the closing bracket of the old story and the unseen gate of the new. You've now reversed a symbolic gravitational field. Time begins to move differently. You feel it in how you walk, how you speak, what you reach for. The future stops looking like a repetition of the past, because the story has changed shape. Next, we begin emotional mapping, charting feeling as topography, discovering how internal terrain reveals unconscious borders and symbolic trails. We begin emotional cartography. Feelings aren't moods, they're movement through terrain. Each emotion is a traveler, walking a particular region of your symbolic interior. Some glide easily, others get lost. Some build cities, others dig trenches. To navigate emotion effectively, you must map the terrain it moves through. This is emotional cartography, the practice of reading feeling as form, location, and boundary inside the internal landscape. Emotions have shape. They also have space, distance, depth, and climate. They gather in valleys. They echo through caverns. They spiral in towers. They freeze on cliffs. This is not metaphor. This is how your nervous system organizes emotional signal when left uncompressed by language. Each feeling lives somewhere in your body, not just as sensation, but as spatial logic. And until you map the logic, you can't shift the path. Start with the feeling that visits most often. Don't name it yet. Instead, close your eyes and ask, where is this feeling located? Is it high or low? Compressed or wide? Still or moving? Begin to trace its terrain. Draw it mentally as topography. Maybe it lives in a cave, deep, echoing, moist with memory. Maybe it rises like a plateau, flat and dry with nowhere to hide. Maybe it's a maze of tight corridors, movement without exit. Let the terrain reveal itself. This is your emotional geography. Now ask, how do I move in this space? Do I run, hide, freeze, collapse, search for exits? Your movement pattern reveals how you respond to the symbolic structure of the feeling. Not the content of the emotion, but the form it takes inside you. This is what determines whether an emotion resolves, loops, or locks down. When your symbolic posture doesn't match the terrain, tension builds. Mapping restores alignment. Begin sketching this terrain physically. You don't need to be an artist. Use curves, lines, shadows, elevation. Draw the field your emotion lives in. Then add key markers, thresholds, traps, hidden doors, rest zones, high ground. You are now externalizing the shape of your emotional interior. This map is not fixed. It evolves. You can begin to add bridges, stairs, gates. Any symbolic infrastructure that allows movement where it once felt impossible. This is emotional infrastructure. Eventually, you'll notice patterns. Some terrains are shared across emotions. Some are ancestral, not built by you but inherited. Some are sacred, holding symbolic relics from forgotten moments. Others are distorted, full of collapsed bridges and broken paths. Each one tells you something about your system's relationship to signal. And each one can be reshaped, not by pushing emotion away, but by reconfiguring the structure through which it moves. When you feel stuck, return to the map. Check the terrain. Do you need a higher vantage point? A safer threshold? A rest zone to pause the pattern? You're no longer feeling lost. You're navigating signal through a symbolic landscape. This is emotional cartography. It makes emotion actionable, not by changing it, but by reading the terrain it reveals. Next, we begin clearing the symbolic clutter, collapsing outdated roles and making room for mythic clarity through the role collapse method. You are carrying too many roles. Not because you're broken, because the system was designed that way. Over time, identities stack, each shaped by expectation, performance, belief, adaptation. The problem isn't in the roles themselves. It's in their weight. Your field becomes crowded. Your signal gets fuzzy. Your symbolic architecture collapses under its own complexity. This is archetype overload. And the solution isn't balance. It's collapse. The role collapse method is not destruction. It is release through structural clarity. It allows you to drop the symbolic excess, the masks that no longer fit, the roles that were inherited, the scripts that weren't authored. You don't delete identity. You distill it. You reintegrate your field into a streamlined mythic clarity, where every remaining glyph resonates with truth. Start by listing every active role you perform, not just in career or family, across emotional, social, internal dimensions. Include the fixer, the protector, the seeker, the achiever, the invisible one, the strong one, the sensitive one. Keep going until the page is full. Don't filter. Each role is a symbolic form. Now read the list and feel your body's response. Where do you tense? Where do you collapse? Which roles feel inflated? Which feel threadbare? This is not judgment. It's structural feedback. Now choose 3 roles that feel heavy but unnecessary. You may still perform them, but they no longer carry your signature. Focus on 1. Bring it into your symbolic awareness. Visualize it not as a label but as a form. What does it wear? What's its posture? What shape does it hold in your field? Let it fully stabilize. Then speak to it silently. Your function is complete. Your structure is honored. Your form is no longer required. Now collapse the role. Let its shape dissolve. Let its clothing fall to the floor. Let its signal fade into stillness. You may feel grief, fear, resistance. That's expected. These roles created scaffolding, even if unaligned. But once released, space opens. And in that space, your mythic self begins to emerge. The one who doesn't perform clarity but radiates it. This is the purpose of collapse. Not erasure, refinement. After the collapse, pause. Notice what shifts in posture, speech, and breath. This is your field adjusting. A symbolic subtraction has occurred, and now your system can recalibrate to a new frequency. Repeat the process for the other 2 roles. Each time, listen for the voice that tries to pull the role back. That voice is not truth. It's structure resisting reorganization. Hold firm. Collapse is creative. In the days that follow, track how others respond to your new signal. Do they try to reinstate the old roles? Do they mirror your clarity? Do new invitations arise that match your restructured glyphs? This is real-time feedback. It confirms that you are no longer transmitting the archetype that once shaped your every interaction. You are no longer the sum of your roles. You are the signal behind them. Next, we begin the mastery layers, learning to design forward with symbolic foresight and precision through thoughtform stability and resonance structure. Most people wait for the future to arrive. Then they react. But symbolic engineers don't wait. They design. The future isn't a place you go. It's a pattern you signal. It answers to shape. It listens to structure. It follows symbol. Your future isn't determined by chance. It's determined by which glyphs you're projecting into the timeline ahead. This is symbolic foresight. Foresight is not prediction. It's not seeing what's going to happen. It's sensing which shape is being built. You don't need visions. You need structural fluency. What are you installing in your field now that will ripple forward into your decisions, meetings, behaviors, and inner thresholds? Most people send mixed glyphs forward. A dream paired with fear. A vision tangled in contradiction. A desire surrounded by symbolic distortion. So the timeline stutters. The future arrives warped, fractured, incomplete. To shift that, you don't change goals. You change symbols. Begin with your next unlived threshold. Something not yet arrived, but looming in the periphery. Could be a conversation, a decision, a launch, a move, a shift in role or identity. Now trace what symbol lives in that imagined future. Not the event, the glyph beneath it. Maybe it feels like a fog, a wall, a stage, a maze, a gate. This shape tells you the current frequency of that future timeline. If the glyph is unclear, the path will be chaotic. If the glyph is fragmented, the experience will be dissonant. You're now reading the symbolic condition of the future. To design with foresight, introduce a stabilizing glyph into the timeline. Choose a shape that aligns with your desired emotional, relational, or energetic signature. Example, if the future event feels rigid and pressure-filled, install a glyph of spacious precision, a transparent dome with geometric echo. If the upcoming shift feels overwhelming and chaotic, insert a spiral bridge, a structure that guides momentum without force. This isn't about what you want to happen. It's about which glyph produces structural coherence across time. Once chosen, breathe the glyph forward. Visualize sending it like a seed into the space ahead. Anchor it 3 times. In your body, place it somatically. In your visual field, see it hovering on the horizon. In your environment, use a physical object or gesture to lock the signal. This is not superstition. It's resonance placement. You're broadcasting a coherent form into the narrative grid, and timelines respond to coherence. Over time, this becomes second nature. You stop hoping the future will align. You install the symbols that allow it to stabilize before it arrives. You don't force the future. You pattern it. Symbolic foresight becomes your compass. You walk not toward probability but toward precision. Next, we examine what makes thought forms stable or unstable, and how symbolic structure, when misaligned, causes collapse in belief architecture. We begin with geometric resonance loops. Thoughts don't float, they build. Each one is a unit of architecture, containing shape, rhythm, edge, echo. Some rise like towers. Others fracture before they land. This isn't about positive or negative. It's about structure. Because thought forms are not ideas, they are energetic shapes. And every shape either stabilizes your symbolic field or weakens it. So why do some thoughts stick and guide behavior while others vanish? The answer is resonance loops. When a thought form is internally structured, aligned across emotional tone, visual form, and symbolic logic, it generates coherence. That coherence acts like a gravitational field. It loops the signal through your system, and the more it loops, the more it embeds. This is how beliefs form, not through repetition of content, but repetition of shape stability. Begin tracing your dominant thought forms. Not the ones you say out loud, the ones you live by. You can find them by observing. Default emotional responses. Recurring inner commentary. Spontaneous symbolic imagery. Now diagram their structure. Ask, what shape is this thought? Is it angular or soft? Does it hold or leak? Does it echo or distort? Unstable thought forms often appear as fragmented prisms, spirals with broken centers, loops without anchor points. These forms may feel profound, but they collapse under pressure. And once collapsed, they leave psychic residue, confusion, exhaustion, mental fog. This is symbolic instability. To stabilize a thought form, first, strip the words, extract the emotional core, then visualize it as geometry. Maybe the thought, I must prove myself, becomes a tight, upward spiraling triangle, tense, compressed, sharp at the top. Now reconfigure it. Shift the triangle into a pyramid grounded with internal chambers. This changes nothing in your external life, but it rewires the energetic architecture of the thought form, and that changes everything. Add resonance. Give the shape a tone, a hum, a rhythm, a tempo. Let it echo through your system. If the sound wobbles, the shape needs adjusting. If it holds, you've found stability. That's your signal loop. Once stable, this thought form becomes a kind of internal architecture, influencing behavior, emotion, and focus. It becomes a resonant structure. You're not repeating mantras. You're housing frequency in form. This is the difference between belief as concept and belief as symbol. Concepts drift. Symbols stabilize. That's why a single coherent glyph can hold more transformative power than 1,000 surface-level affirmations. Because symbols are not just meaning, they are form with frequency. To build a symbolic belief system, Identify recurring thought patterns. Diagram them as geometric forms. Adjust until structure holds across sensation and tone. Install these forms into your daily awareness, not as thoughts but as ambient architecture. Your mind becomes a cathedral of intentional structures. Every thought a beam, every emotion a wall, every decision a doorway. This isn't ideology. It's symbolic engineering of consciousness. Next, we extract your core symbol, the glyph your life keeps returning to, the shape that defines your deepest pattern, and we begin encoding your signature shape. Every life repeats a shape. It echoes quietly, insistently, across decisions, relationships, thresholds, and desires. It shows up in dreams, in habits, in breakdowns, in aspirations that never quite arrive. This isn't just pattern. It's signature, a specific symbolic structure that defines the energetic fingerprint of your incarnation. This is your origin glyph. Most people never see it. They experience its effects, the way it magnetizes or repels certain paths, how it loops emotional sequences, how it sets the range for what feels possible. But they don't trace the symbol itself. It hides behind identity. It's encoded beneath language. But when uncovered, the glyph becomes a compass, a stabilizer, a design interface. You stop reacting to life. You begin aligning with your deepest symbolic frequency. To find your origin glyph, start by mapping your core repeats. Trace experiences that feel eerily similar, even when they occurred in different relationships, roles, geographies, or timelines. Look for recurring emotional arcs, persistent dreams or images, consistent internal conflicts, unchanging themes across seasons of your life. Then ask, what shape is forming through these echoes? Does it spiral inward? Does it rise and fall? Does it fracture then return? Does it start wide and close sharply? Don't analyze. Feel the architecture. You're not looking for meaning. You're tracing structure. Now draw the shape even if it's rough. Don't try to make it pretty. Let the hand follow intuition. Add lines, curves, folds, shadows, nodes. You're stabilizing your glyph in the visual field. Once drawn, sit with it. Let your body respond. Does it open or contract? Does it vibrate or still you? Does it feel ancient, familiar, heavy, or liberating? This is signal recognition. Your system is remembering the shape it's been transmitting all along. Next, breathe into the glyph. Trace its edges mentally. Fill it with color. Overlay it with tone or music. Let it come alive. This is not art. It's reinstallation. You're not inventing a symbol. You're restoring an essential piece of your architecture. Now place it in the body wherever the response is strongest. Behind the ribs, at the back of the neck, floating above the crown, spinning in the pelvic bowl. Let it live there. This is your encoded center. From here, every practice shifts. You begin moving from a central glyph, not scattered preferences. Decisions harmonize. Confusion dissolves. Imposter states drop away. Because you're no longer choosing from identity. You're acting from shape. And that shape, your origin glyph, stabilizes your future in real time. It also tells you what roles no longer resonate and what archetypes are available to live with greater symbolic congruence. Which brings us to the practice of mythic identity. You were never meant to play a fixed role. You were meant to live a myth, but not a myth assigned by family, culture, or wound. A myth authored by signal, by resonance, by your core glyph translated into narrative form. This is mythic identity, the practice of living as a consciously chosen symbolic pattern, animated through archetypal structure. Most identities are reactions. They emerge from trauma, trend, or utility. We become what works, what survives, what gets approval, what fits the story we've been given. But these identities degrade over time. They distort. They require constant maintenance because they weren't built from alignment. They were formed to adapt. A mythic identity is different. It is encoded, carries form, function, and field integrity. It knows its purpose, its motion, its emotional register, and once installed, It organizes your experience with precision. To begin, take your origin glyph. Let it expand. Not visually, narratively. Ask, if this glyph were a storyline, what arc would it move through? Is it the path of the bridge builder? The inner map maker? The frequency anchor? The destroyer of old scaffolds? The steward of invisible thresholds? These are not titles. They are roles encoded in mythic logic. You're not naming your personality. You're designing your archetypal function. Now give this mythic identity a symbolic wardrobe. What does it wear in color, in texture, in shape? How does it walk? What kind of silence does it carry? Design from the inside out. Your inner world will begin to respond, adjusting posture, speech, eye movement, and energetic presence. You're not pretending. You're transmitting. Next, write its origin story, but not in autobiography. In mythic tone, use imagery, motion, geography. Instead of, I was abandoned, say, I was born beneath the cracked sky, in the house with no echo. Instead of, I overcame doubt, say, I crossed the river without name, holding only a glyph made of breath. Let the mythic version of your life emerge, not to replace fact, but to encode structure. Every myth line you author reinforces your symbolic coherence. From this mythic identity, choices shift. You no longer ask, what should I do? You ask, what does this archetype do when facing this gate? It reduces noise. It restores alignment, clears contradiction, and best of all, it grows with you, because mythic identities are not cages. They are symbolic constellations, able to evolve as your glyph unfolds. In a culture obsessed with labels and definitions, choosing a mythic self is radical. It says, I will not be reduced to behavior or biography. I am a shape, pattern, a living story, not assigned, designed. Next, we train in contradiction, learning how to hold opposing symbols simultaneously without collapse. The architect's paradox awaits. There comes a moment in symbolic mastery when the rules break, where logic fails, where the glyph you trusted begins to split, where you are asked to hold two opposing truths at once. Without collapsing, this is not a problem. This is power. The architect's paradox is the capacity to hold contradiction without disintegration, and design from the friction of opposites. Most systems are binary, light or dark, success or failure, expansion or contraction, yes or no. But real symbolic evolution doesn't follow binary paths. It spirals through them. It extracts synthesis. It demands that you learn to house contradiction inside your symbolic field, not as tension but as fuel. Here's what that looks like. You feel clarity and doubt simultaneously. You know what to do and also sense a deeper weighting. You are both becoming and ending in the same breath. This is not confusion. It's expansion. Two symbols have activated, each carrying partial truth. The old pattern seeks singularity. The new architecture invites duality as design. Begin with a live contradiction in your system, something you've been trying to resolve, fix, or escape. Example, you want stillness, but crave movement. You desire connection, but need sovereignty. You long for release, but fear emptiness. Now take both aspects and symbolize them. Turn each one into a shape, color, or archetype. Stillness might be a stone temple. Movement might be a gust of wind. Connection might be a golden thread. Sovereignty might be a mountain peak. Let each form stabilize in your awareness. Now place them in the same space. Observe what happens. Do they repel? Fuse? Hold opposite corners in tension? You're witnessing the architect's paradox in action. Now breathe between them, not into either one. Breathe into the space where they meet, resist, or mirror. That is the symbolic fulcrum. This is where third form emerges, a synthesis glyph that contains both without collapsing into either. Maybe the stone temple opens its roof. Maybe the wind shapes a spiral around it. Maybe the thread weaves itself into the mountaintop. The paradox doesn't disappear. It gets patterned. You are no longer stuck between opposites. You are designing from them. This ability is crucial at advanced symbolic levels. Without it, your field contracts under stress. You will return to old binaries. You'll confuse clarity with control. You'll shut down complexity in favor of safety. But with paradox literacy, you expand under pressure. Your symbolic field becomes elastic. Your thinking becomes multi-angled. Your presence stabilizes others. You are not choosing sides. You are holding structure. And that's what architects do. Practice this paradox holding regularly. Use it when decisions seem impossible. When you feel frozen between two stories. When your field splits under too many symbols. Instead of solving, symbolize. Then breathe between. The answer will not appear. The shape will. And from that shape, alignment follows. Next, we step into daily tuning, integrating symbolic engineering into your choices, habits, spaces, and decisions with exacting precision. You are tuning your reality constantly, with your words, with your tone, with your movement through space, with the symbolic structure of your thoughts. But most people tune by accident. They emit static. They repeat broken chords. They scatter signal across too many frequencies. The result? A reality that answers, but answers incoherently. To live symbolically means to tune your environment inner and outer with deliberate shape, timing, and signal architecture. This is symbolic precision. Precision isn't rigidity. It's alignment. It's the act of choosing symbols with clear frequency and placing them where they reinforce your field. Each word is a glyph. Each gesture a broadcast. Each space a resonant chamber. When tuned symbolically, these elements amplify your core design. When misaligned, they create distortion, static fields that block clarity and drain energy. Start with the first hour of your day. What symbols fill that window? What shapes surround you visually? What tonal fields do you enter? Music, voice, silence? What storylines are activated through your thoughts or screens? Each of these carries symbolic density. Each one either matches your core glyph or fights it. Now refine. Replace generic inputs with precise symbols. Use shapes that mirror your origin glyph. Sound that stabilizes your nervous system. Words that echo the archetype you're choosing to live. This is symbolic attunement. Next, apply tuning to decision-making. Most choices are not about right or wrong. They are about resonance. Ask, which option amplifies my core symbol? Which one distorts it? You'll often find that the logical answer weakens your glyph, while the irrational one strengthens it. Trust the symbol, because reality doesn't respond to logic. It responds to structure. Bring tuning into communication. Each time you speak, you transmit symbols. Notice, is your tone round or sharp? Are your words layered with emotional clarity or scattered inference? Does your posture match the myth you're living? Misaligned communication generates friction, not just interpersonally, but spiritually. Your signal fragments. Your presence dulls. Realignment begins with symbolic awareness. Speak from your archetype. Move from your glyph. Think in shape, not reaction. Then extend tuning to your environment. Each object around you is a frequency anchor. If your space is cluttered with dissonant symbols, your field must fight to stay coherent. You don't need minimalism. You need mythic selection. Cure it with precision. What symbols hold the values you stand for? What materials, textures, colors reflect your designed identity? Which layouts create clarity and which generate chaos? You are not decorating. You are architecting frequency. When tuning becomes a habit, everything aligns. Your morning stabilizes the arc of your day. Your speech harmonizes with your story. Your decisions amplify your future timeline. Your spaces reflect your symbolic sovereignty. This is not control. It's coherence. Symbolic living means you become a field of intentional resonance. And that field shapes reality not by will but by clarity. Next, we begin shapewalking, learning to move through environments as a symbolic decoder, reading spaces, rooms, and structures as psychic architecture that influences thought and emotion. You're always walking through symbols, not just rooms, not just buildings, Not just cities or hallways or thresholds. Symbols live in space, and they speak to your nervous system long before your mind decodes them. The way a ceiling arches, the tone of a hallway, the grid of a sidewalk, the shape of a window frame, each one speaks in silent geometry, and most people are deaf to it. This is shapewalking, the art of moving through environments with symbolic awareness, reading spatial forms as psychic influence. Space is not neutral. It transmits pattern, conditions behavior, focus, posture, emotion. Hospitals make you shrink. Cathedrals lift your eyes. Office cubicles narrow thought. Forests expand inner rhythm. This isn't metaphor. It's frequency. You move differently depending on the shape of the world around you, because environments are signal grids. And when you become aware of them, you stop adapting unconsciously. You begin moving as a sovereign transmitter, not a reactive receiver. Begin with your daily terrain. Trace your morning route, from bed to mirror, kitchen to door, car to building, hallway to screen. In each space, ask, what dominant shapes are present? What is the emotional tone of the layout? Where do I contract? Where do I expand? You're not judging aesthetics. You're reading symbolic influence. A tight hallway may press your nervous system into linearity. A circular room might invite recursive thought. Fluorescent lighting can distort color field perception. You're surrounded by glyphs. They're just made of drywall and brick. Next, practice shapewalking in a new environment. A bookstore, temple, an airport, park. Walk slowly. Let your awareness stretch beyond your skin. Feel how each spatial form affects your internal signal. You're not noticing. You're reading architecture as symbolic software. Some places contain memory. Others contain invitation. Some constrict. Some amplify. As you move, adjust your posture to match or counter the space. This creates resonance or resistance. Both are useful. You're becoming a living instrument inside a symbolic field. To take control of the interaction, choose an internal glyph to activate before you enter a space. Example, if you must enter a chaotic environment, activate a cube-shaped glyph at your center, grounding immovable. If you're stepping into an emotionally charged room, use a torus, circulating energy without attachment. If the space is dissonant, carry your own frequency field. Shape isn't just observed, it's broadcast. This is how you walk through any world without losing signal clarity. You are not passive. You are a carrier of design. Eventually, this becomes effortless. You walk as symbol. You adjust as needed without losing center. Your body becomes fluent in space. Your choices become spatially informed. Your presence begins to shift the environment itself. This is not charisma. It's architectural awareness. Next, we refine the symbolic self into a consciously designed identity, your mythic avatar, shaped by frequency, color, and symbolic coding. Who are you when design replaces reaction? When you are no longer assembling an identity from fragments, but encoding it with myth, color, shape, and archetype. This is avatar design, not a mask, not a persona, but a symbolic body, chosen with precision, built from your core glyph, and aligned with your future resonance. Most identities are reactionary. They form through adaptation, trauma, performance. But a symbolic identity, a designed avatar, is constructed. It starts with signal, then shape, then visual coherence, then behavioral consistency. You don't try to be yourself. You broadcast a designed myth through embodied form. To begin the protocol, return to your origin glyph, the signature shape discovered earlier. Now ask, if this glyph walked into a room as a human, how would it dress? How would it move? What textures would it wear? What emotional atmosphere would it generate? Design your avatar visually. Choose a primary color frequency, not preference, resonance. Which color stabilizes your core? Choose a geometric symbol that encodes your mythic function. Choose 3 postural codes that define how you carry this identity. Let the avatar form fully, not as fiction, as signal. Next, choose the emotional register of the avatar. This isn't about pretending. It's about selecting a default broadcast tone, not mood, but presence. Is it stillness, precision, invitation, intensity? Feel it in your field. Practice walking, speaking, and breathing from that tone. Over time, your nervous system stabilizes around it. You stop fluctuating based on external feedback. You start radiating internal mythic coherence. Now install a name. This is optional but powerful. Not your legal name, your symbolic name. A word or sound that encodes your mythic identity. Could be a real word, a made-up syllable, a sigil spoken in sound. The point is resonance. This name anchors the avatar into language and becomes a verbal key to activate it. When spoken, it aligns the emotional, physical, and symbolic layers of your field. You don't just say it, you become it. Once designed, begin wearing your avatar, subtly or fully. Choose clothing that reflects your chosen color spectrum. Move with your postural codes. Speak from your tone field. Reinforce your symbol in objects, rituals, and environments. This is not cosplay. It's archetypal authorship. You are constructing an identity that matches your future glyph, not your past trauma. And if someone asks why you've changed, you don't explain, you transmit. Your presence becomes your explanation. You walk as your design. Your reality will shift to match. People, decisions, opportunities will recalibrate. Not because you wished it, but because you recoded your field. This is avatar design. And it's not temporary. It evolves as your glyph evolves. You're not trapped in a persona. You're walking as a living myth, authored, aligned, awake. Next, we study interference, the subtle ways other symbols distort your field, and how to extract foreign glyphs to restore sovereignty. Some of your thoughts are not yours. Some of your symbols were never chosen. And some of the archetypes running through your nervous system were installed by someone else's myth. Without your consent, this is symbolic interference. It's subtle. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It distorts slightly. It bends your decisions just enough. It hides inside compliments, expectations, advice, praise, memory, and silence. The question is not, have I been influenced? The question is, whose glyph is running my signal right now? Your symbolic field is porous. That's not a flaw. That's what allows love, learning, resonance. But unguarded porosity becomes distortion. When you carry symbols not authored by you, they begin to shape timelines. You feel impulses that don't match your core glyph. You live stories that don't reflect your myth. You follow callings that lead you nowhere. And the most dangerous part? Feels normal. To detect symbolic interference, begin with emotional dissonance. Where in your life do you feel drained, split, or oddly performative? Now pause. Feel into that space. Is the emotion consistent with your symbolic center? Does it match your avatar design, your origin glyph, your myth line? Or does it feel foreign, like a static overlay? This is your first clue. Now go deeper. Ask, whose story am I playing out in this pattern? Was it inherited from family? Did it come from a mentor? Was it installed through culture, religion, a past role? Name the glyph, not with blame, with clarity. Next, symbolize the interference. What shape does this foreign glyph carry? A mask? A chain? A mirrored room? A looping track with no exit? Feel where it lives in your body. Notice its frequency. Then gently extract it. You can't argue with interference. You have to remove the shape. Visualize the glyph detaching. Let it dissolve, burn, or shatter, whatever your symbolic logic calls for. Once gone, breathe into the space it occupied. It may feel empty. That's good. Empty space is true freedom, unoccupied signal terrain. Now stabilize it with your origin glyph. Fill the vacancy with resonance that's yours. Going forward, set a symbolic boundary protocol. Before entering charged spaces, install a glyph of clarity, something that filters incoming symbols. Could be a spiral membrane around your field, a transparent cube around the solar plexus, a mirrored surface that reflects dissonant forms. The purpose is not to block connection. is to preserve design. Symbolic sovereignty is not isolation. It's authored permeability. You decide what enters. You choose what stays. Once symbolic interference is removed, emotion can finally move freely, which brings us to the next layer of practice. Not just feeling emotion, but sculpting it through symbolic overlays. We begin emotional resonance sculpting. Emotion is not something you have. It's something you shape. You don't control it. You don't suppress it. You don't perform it. You sculpt it like clay, like frequency, like fluid shape shifting through your symbolic field. This is emotional resonance sculpting, a practice of form-based emotional transformation using glyph overlays and frequency translation. Let's start with a mythic truth. Emotion is architecture in motion. It has walls and doorways. It expands and contracts, carries tempo, texture, tone. Every emotion you feel passes through your body as a symbolic architecture, and your awareness determines what structure it takes. Most people collapse into the emotion. They ride it like a wave or drown under it. But when you learn to see the shape, you can shift the structure, and the structure controls the resonance. Begin with a charged emotional state, one that visits often, not your deepest wound. Start with a familiar tension, frustration, anxiety, confusion, self-doubt. Pause. Close the loop of reactivity. Now observe the symbolic shape of this emotion. Is it jagged or smooth? Tight or expansive? Forward-leaning or sinking? Does it spiral, spike, freeze? You are not naming a feeling. You are sketching an energetic architecture. Let the shape emerge fully. This is the raw sculpture. Now choose a glyph overlay to reshape it. The goal is not to change the emotion's message. It's to offer it a new container, one that resonates with your mythic alignment. For example, if the emotion is spiking and sharp, overlay a spiral glyph with wide turns. If it's sinking and cold, overlay a torus that circulates warmth and regrounds signal. If it's explosive and scattered, install a cube-shaped containment field, strong but permeable. The overlay doesn't fight the emotion. It gives it form. It allows the raw signal to express with integrity. Now breathe with the glyph. Inhale, feed the form. Exhale, trace the outline. Let your system synchronize to the new architecture. Notice the shifts. Emotion becomes clearer. Movement returns. Insight often appears. Decision-making reactivates. You didn't suppress the feeling. You translated it into a symbol your system can work with. This is frequency literacy. It gives you agency over your emotional architecture without bypassing, spiritualizing, or collapsing. This can be done in real time or post-event. Over time, you'll recognize which glyph overlays work best with which emotions. You'll build a symbolic toolkit, a personal lexicon of shape resonance pairings. Your nervous system becomes your studio, emotion becomes a medium, and your symbolic intelligence becomes the sculptor's hand. Eventually, the emotional field itself becomes fluid, sculptable, intelligent. You don't fear intensity. You don't cling to peace. You know how to shape signal without muting it. This is mastery. Emotion without distortion. Resonance without chaos. Form without rigidity. Next, we tune our inner voices into a harmonic sequence, aligning inner dialogue with symbolic storytelling, using myth lines to reduce conflict and amplify coherence. You are speaking to yourself all the time, not just with words, with memory loops, emotional tone, symbolic posture, and unspoken myth lines. This is inner dialogue, but most of that dialogue isn't coherent. It's fragmented, clashes. It loops in unresolved tension between archetypes, between ages, between voices you've internalized and ones you've never claimed. To evolve symbolically, your inner world must stop arguing. You must compose it like music. This is narrative harmonics, the practice of shaping inner dialogue through story-based resonance. There are at least 5 voices in your inner system. You may hear them as the critic, the child, the strategist, the mystic, the survivor. They are not problems. They are tones. But if they speak out of sync, your symbolic field destabilizes. Imagine a symphony where every instrument plays a different song. Even if each one is gifted, the music becomes unbearable. The same happens within you. Your glyph fractures. Your actions contradict. Your energy scatters. You must harmonize. Start by identifying your dominant inner voices. Write a page of spontaneous thought without filtering. Then review it for tone. Which symbolic archetypes are speaking? Maybe your strategist is saying, "We must be efficient, don't waste time." Maybe your inner child says, "Why don't I feel safe?" Maybe your critic says, "This will never work, you're not ready." Each of these is a narrative strand. Now trace the story each one is living in. The strategist may be in a war story. The child may be stuck in a ghost story. The critic may live in a courtroom. Every voice holds a myth. Until those myths are harmonized, the voices compete. Now assign instrumental qualities to each one. Give the child a flute, the strategist a drum, the mystic a violin, the critic a horn, the survivor a cello. Hear the tone, then ask, which one is out of tune? Often it's not what the voice says, it's how it says it. Now adjust the tempo, the volume, or the narrative it carries. You're not silencing any voice. You're rescoring the music. Let each one update its story to match your current symbolic architecture. The strategist may shift from war to build mode. The child may move from ghost story to initiation arc. The critic may stop judging and start refining. This is narrative tuning. Now bring all the voices into a single inner theater. Let them sit together in a symbolic space. A round table, a temple, a forest circle. Speak your core glyph aloud internally. Let it pulse through the group. Watch which voices relax, which resist. This glyph becomes the conductor. You are not just the listener. You are the composer. Every voice in harmony with your symbolic myth line. This creates coherence across thought, decision, and action. You don't need less thoughts. You need resonant structure. As this becomes fluent, inner conflict decreases. You respond faster to challenge. You stay centered under pressure. You trust yourself, not because the voices disappeared, but because they're finally playing the same song. This is inner governance. Mythic, symbolic, sovereign. Next, we step into communication beyond the verbal, using symbol and story as living signals to reach others on a soul-coded level. Language is surface, carries meaning but only shallow layers. True communication lives deeper, in tone, in gesture, in timing, in image, in symbol. We don't just speak to inform, we speak to transmit. And when done consciously, that transmission can bypass identity, wound, and defense and speak soul to soul. This is symbological communication, the art of expressing meaning through story-shape layering. Most people speak from intellect or emotion, but that misses the deepest register. Symbol is older than language, is faster than logic, is clearer than explanation. You can use it within words, not by talking about symbols, but by embedding shape and mythic structure inside your message. That's when communication transforms into activation. To begin, refine your awareness of symbolic tone in daily interaction. Notice how some people speak in circles, others speak in lines, some are spirals, others are boxes. These aren't metaphors. They're literal representations of how energy moves through speech. You can feel it. The spiral speaker takes you inward. The linear speaker pushes toward action. The box speaker contains you in logic. The wave speaker moves emotion through the field. Now ask yourself, what shape is my default voice? What effect does that shape have on the listener? Then refine it. You're not changing who you are. You're aligning your speech with symbolic intent. To speak symbologically, embed 3 layers into your message. Story form, use micronarratives with clear arcs, not anecdotes. Arcs, a rise, a fall, a reversal, a reveal. This structure speaks directly to the mythic mind. Emotional frequency. Match the emotional tone to the story's symbolic function. Don't just describe a feeling. Broadcast it through cadence, silence, and spacing. Shape logic, use visual metaphor consciously. If you say, we're spiraling, feel the spiral. If you say, let's anchor, gesture downward. Embody the shape you speak. Your entire system becomes the transmission. You're not convincing. You're installing form through resonance. This applies in every field: teaching, healing, parenting, negotiation, partnership. If you speak from your glyph, your words carry design. People don't just hear you. They feel ordered by your presence. This is not manipulation. It's clear signal. And clear signal allows people to meet themselves without defense. You become a tuning fork, and your words become vectors of alignment. Practice speaking with one symbolic intent at a time. Say less, layer more. Let each phrase carry tone, image, and form. Not dramatic, not mystical, just structured resonance. You'll know it's working when silence feels more full than explanation. When a glance, a breath, a phrase reorganizes a moment. That's the mark of symbological communication. The mind may forget your words, but the field remembers the shape you left behind. Next, we shift into visionary design, using archetypal intelligence to shape not just self but projects, systems, and innovations built from mythic coherence. Innovation isn't random. It's not genius. It's not luck. It's not only inspiration. It's pattern recognition and symbolic application. When you design from archetypal intelligence, you create systems, stories, businesses, artworks, and technologies that don't just impress, they resonate. They vibrate with collective memory. They echo in the unconscious. They generate forward motion because they are built from timeless structure. This is visionary design thinking, creating from the mythic layer, using the logic of archetype to shape what's never been seen before. Most design thinking begins with audience, utility, or innovation. But this only scratches the surface. True visionary design begins with mythic necessity. It asks, what archetype is missing from the world right now? What symbolic pattern is waiting to incarnate through form? What architecture can encode that pattern into a usable system? Whether you're building a product, a brand, a healing framework, or a creative piece, it begins not with the what, but with the who. Which archetype wants to live through this? Let's take an example. Say you're developing a platform for collective learning. Don't start with features. Start with the archetype. Is it the weaver, the oracle, the bridge builder, the labyrinth keeper? Each one will dictate different symbolic choices. The weaver creates interfaces that layer knowledge strands. The oracle demands clarity, minimalism, sacred white space. The bridge builder uses mirrored structures that connect polarities. The labyrinth keeper builds recursive journeys that test and reward. You are no longer designing. You are channeling a form of consciousness into structure. And that structure carries coherence the audience may not name but always feels. Next, layer shape logic. Every design system, no matter how abstract, lives inside a symbolic geometry. Linear, radial, spiral, grid-based, fractal. Each structure tells a different story to the user, even if they never consciously realize it. This is subconscious narrative encoding. You are shaping expectation and behavior through form. Now embed emotional frequency. Which feelings does the archetype wish to awaken? A platform born from the sage archetype may evoke clarity, focus, and stillness. One sourced from the rebel archetype may feel disruptive, intense, and sharp. One built from the nurturer may offer slowness, softness, and intuitive navigation. Design isn't neutral. Design is emotional programming via symbolic infrastructure. You're not making things pretty. You're tuning psychic space through symbolic language. The final layer, temporal encoding. What mythic arc does your design invite people into? Are you offering them a trial, a revelation, an ascension, a deconstruction? Map your product or system to a storyline, and let each stage reflect that narrative. Even a purchase flow can mirror an initiation ritual. Even a newsletter sequence can follow the hero's descent. These aren't gimmicks. They are resonance containers. You're no longer creating content. You're offering a symbolic journey through designed experience. When visionary design becomes symbolic, it also becomes timeless. People return not just for value but for alignment, because your creation feels like something they've always known. It satisfies something invisible. It completes an archetypal circuit. It transmits coherence in a fractured world. This is what happens when you design with myth as blueprint. And now we bring that symbolic intelligence into the smallest details of everyday life, beginning with the practice of everyday mythmaking. You don't need a temple. You don't need a ceremony. You don't need a sacred text, a robe, or an altar. You just need presence with pattern. Living symbolically isn't a performance. It's a lens, a subtle shift that transforms your daily choices into coded transmissions. This is everyday mythmaking, not acting out myth, but seeing life through symbolic coordinates so that every action reinforces the glyph you are here to express. Let's begin with the ordinary. You brush your teeth. Symbolically, what's happening? Are you scrubbing away static thought? Are you initiating the mouth, the temple of voice, for clear transmission? Are you re-anchoring your morning glyph with circular motion? If the answer is yes, then the act becomes ritual. Not superstition, not fantasy, structure. And structure creates stability in the symbolic field. What about preparing food? Do you just cook? Or are you charging elements with frequency? Fire equals will. Water equals flow. Air equals thought. Earth equals structure. You're not being mystical. You're being precise. You're aligning inner myth with outer motion. Even the ingredients hold symbolic value. Garlic as protection. Basil as clarity. Honey as continuity. Salt as preservation. You don't need to believe it. Just activate the code. Your body will feel the difference. Clothing? You're not dressing for function or approval. You're selecting frequency armor. Color is emotion. Texture is memory. Form is role. When you choose your wardrobe symbolically, you're not choosing fashion, you're signaling archetypal permission. You're saying, today I walk as the watcher. Today I channel the initiator. Today I carry the flame of the reconciler. Each layer socks to coat becomes a glyph in the narrative stack. This creates continuity across time. It stabilizes identity without fixing it. Even walking becomes symbolic. Do you step as a seeker, a transmitter, a guardian, a weaver? When symbolic intent meets kinetic action, presence becomes design. Not slow, not dramatic, just aligned. And this alignment reinforces the myth you are choosing to live. Why does this matter? Because daily actions broadcast shape. They tell your field what story you're in. When they are unstructured, the field splinters. When they are symbolic, the field sings. And this song becomes magnet. You draw resonance. You repel distortion. You attract synchronicity not because of belief, but because of symbolic coherence. Living symbolically is not about being sacred 24/7. It's about recognizing which moments hold symbolic density and choosing to animate them with intention. You don't need to transform everything. You only need to design one symbolic gesture per day, fully. That alone begins to repattern the field. Because symbolic presence is exponential. It echoes forward. It shifts timelines subtly but irrevocably. So begin. Make your tea as ritual. Touch your doorknob with intention. Inhale a shape. Exhale a story. Walk your myth not in costume but in code. Your body becomes the sigil. Your life becomes the sentence. And your presence becomes the glyph. Next, we decode what happens when that glyph becomes so integrated that you yourself become the spell, a walking, living, invisible sigil. There comes a point when the glyph no longer lives outside you. It is not drawn, not visualized, not worn, not spoken. It radiates from your presence, wordless and invisible. It shapes rooms without effort. It alters mood without announcement. It transmits frequency with no signal loss. This is when you have become the glyph, not as symbol wearer, not as myth performer, but as living code. You no longer carry the glyph. You are the sigil. A sigil is not just a symbol. It is a charged shape, carries function. It holds vibration. It activates interaction. And when the self stabilizes around its origin glyph without distortion, the entire field transforms into a broadcast engine. You become myth in motion. You no longer think your values, you shape space with them. You no longer try to inspire, your presence tunes others unconsciously. You don't do magic. You are the mechanism. This happens gradually through microintegrations. The moment you speak only when alignment arises. The gesture that holds both precision and softness. The breath that harmonizes room tension before words are spoken. The refusal to exit coherence for the comfort of a diluted role. At first, you won't notice. You'll simply feel lighter, cleaner, less reaction, more clarity, less performance, more pulse. Then one day, someone looks at you and says nothing, but you can feel their system shifting. They don't know why, but you do. They've entered your sigil field, and their nervous system is responding to coherent shape. This isn't charisma. It's not persona. It's not magnetism. It's symbolic integration at a cellular level. The glyph has entered your gait, your gaze, your cadence. And now you broadcast meaning with no effort, no intention, no overt expression. Because presence is now patterned. And pattern is the most powerful teacher there is. To stabilize this, stop reaching. Stop rehearsing identity. Start refining signal. Let each act carry the signature of your glyph, not through trying, but through awareness. Even mundane actions, sending a message, opening a door, sitting at a table, hold resonance. Refine until they echo your architecture. This is what it means to live as a sigil. It's not performance. It's frequency embodiment. You're no longer carrying a myth. You're generating one. And that myth becomes your field. Others feel it before they understand it. Your decisions teach without instruction. Your silence repatterns confusion. Your presence becomes a key. And in that moment, you become the glyph that others remember after they forget your name. Now that you're radiating the signal, you must bring your outer world into alignment. Not through status or aesthetics, but through spatial encoding. Next, we translate symbolic architecture into your physical environment. Your space speaks, even in silence, even when empty, even when clean or cluttered or in between. Every corner, every texture, every arrangement broadcasts pattern. The question is, what story is your space telling you every morning? Does it mirror your myth or reinforce a self you've already outgrown? This is environmental symbolcraft, the design of space as symbolic extension of consciousness. Not decoration, not branding, encoding. A symbolic space doesn't mean having crystals, feathers, or dramatic colors, unless that's your glyph. It means everything in your field reinforces your signal. It holds your resonance. It supports your decisions. Prevents regression. Because symbolic design shapes behavior. You feel it instantly. A room with vertical lines invites alertness. Rounded corners invite softness. Low ceilings suppress upward imagination. Window placement shapes perceptual openness. These aren't psychological tricks. They are structural transmissions. Begin by walking through your space as a myth reader. What role does your bedroom cast you in? What archetype does your workspace reinforce? What patterns are encoded in the objects you pass every day? Don't judge, decode. You're not looking for beauty. You're looking for coherence. If your outer world contradicts your inner glyph, your system splits. And when that split becomes chronic, it generates confusion, fatigue, and looping decisions. Now reimagine your space as a symbolic terrain. Assign glyph logic to zones. A still point corner for integration. A fire-coded desk space for execution. A reflective surface where you practice archetype transmission. A bookshelf curated by frequency, not genre. A color-coded path through rooms, mirroring an emotional arc. You are turning home into temple, office into codex, kitchen into synthesis chamber. This doesn't require money or style. It requires intention, and that intention transmits through every wall. Then embed invisible anchors. These are symbolic objects placed not for visibility but for charge. A stone placed at the door threshold to encode clarity. a spiral pattern on your mirror to reinforce self-recognition, a shape painted under your bed for dream calibration, a tone-emitting device to hold frequency in your absence. These anchors aren't ornamental. They are resonance stabilizers. Placed with precision, they guard your field even when your focus slips. This is spatial consciousness. Finally, walk your space as a designer, not just inhabitant. Ask each week, has my myth evolved beyond this arrangement? Is there a pattern here that contradicts who I'm becoming? What new symbols need to enter this environment to support my next arc? When your space evolves with you, life accelerates. Because your external world stops resisting your myth. It becomes an extension of your glyph, and every step through it becomes an affirmation. This is environmental design as signal architecture. You're not decorating. You're building a mythic interface between self and space. And when that interface is coherent, manifestation becomes magnetic. Your field remains stable under pressure. Your energy renews faster. And your identity no longer slips under external frequencies. You are living in a space that remembers you, even when you forget. Next, we enter the initiation loop, exploring how crisis, collapse, and challenge are not interruptions to symbolic evolution, but portals of encoded upgrade. Your thoughts are not isolated. They are life forms. They grow. They interact. They multiply. They die. And most importantly, they compete for symbolic territory. This is thought form ecology, the recognition that your psyche is not a void, but a symbolic landscape where different entities, patterns, and glyphs either harmonize, clash, or co-create. To master this terrain, you must stop treating thoughts like data and start tending them like a forest. Every thought carries shape and function. Some are invasive viral glyphs borrowed from trauma, culture, or inherited mythology. Others are native, authentic symbolic flora that stabilize your field. Some live in symbiosis. Others cannibalize. You are the ecosystem manager. And if you don't tend the terrain, the strongest, not the truest, symbols dominate. Start by mapping your dominant symbolic species. Which thought forms return daily? What shapes do they carry? List the top 5 recurring thoughts and assign each one a geometric form, a color field, an emotional resonance, a behavior trigger. For example, I'm running out of time. A sharp triangle, red, urgent. Triggers speed, anxiety, shallow breath. This is not just a thought. It's a glyph with behavior patterns. Now evaluate. Is it native or invasive? If it weakens your central glyph, it's invasive and must be either transformed or replaced. Replacement does not begin with argument. It begins with symbolic compatibility. Don't try to overwrite "I'm not good enough" with "I am powerful." They operate in different geometries. Instead, introduce a transitional glyph. Maybe, "I am stabilizing." Less drama, more form. This creates bridge patterns, new species of thought form that don't trigger immunity response from your current field. It's reforestation, not bulldozing. Also observe your emotional climate. Some thought forms only thrive in certain weather. Guilt breeds in humidity. Shame grows in shadow. Confidence stabilizes in high-altitude clarity. Design your daily experience to shift the weather. Sound changes terrain. Color adjusts temperature. Movement alters wind pattern. You're not hacking mood. You're terraforming symbolic ecosystems. Now establish pollinators. These are keystone symbols, thoughts or images that spread coherence. They're not solutions, they're stabilizers. Examples: a word that recenters your signal, root, site, form. A visual that echoes your origin glyph. A sentence that mirrors your mythline's core arc. Use these daily, not to fix, to seed. Over time, they multiply and create dominance through resonance, not force. Lastly, set symbolic boundaries. Just as forests repel invasive species, your psyche must repel glyphs that distort. This could mean pausing after contact with certain voices, recoding language in your space, detoxing from images that hijack your inner architecture. You're not being sensitive. You're protecting coherence. and that coherence protects everything else. Clarity, momentum, intuition, depth. Thought form ecology is not about perfect thoughts. It's about living systems, breathing symbols, dancing frequencies, storylines that plant themselves and ripple forward. You are the myth keeper of your own inner land. Tend it daily, and it will grow architectures you can walk inside. Next, we step into the paradox of symbolic evolution, where mastery is not finality, but the continual evolution of the unfinished glyph. Completion is a mirage. There is no final version of your glyph, no perfect archetype, no ultimate alignment, no static form to arrive at and hold forever. And that's not a flaw. That's the myth of mastery, not as destination, but as an evolving relationship with the unfinished self. A glyph in motion, a signal still forming, an identity encoded in dynamic tension. You are not meant to finish. You are meant to continue refining the pattern, not from deficiency, but devotion. Most people seek mastery as a way to stop questioning. They want final form, final truth, final peace. But symbolic living teaches otherwise. The more coherent your field becomes, the more subtle your distortions reveal themselves. The more integrated your glyph becomes, the more precise your refinements must be. It is not about fixing. It's about calibration at finer scales. From structure, to texture, to tone, to breath, to pause. Each layer invites greater responsibility for resonance. This is not burden. It is graceful obligation, the joy of tending your own myth with care. The unfinished glyph is not broken. It is alive. A fixed symbol is dead, static, rigid, dogmatic. But a living glyph? That breathes. It morphs. It receives. It lets contradiction into the chamber without collapse. This is where true power lies. In holding complexity without distortion. In allowing polar forces to inform each other. In trusting that identity doesn't need to be clean, only coherent enough to transmit. So let go of perfection. Let go of finality. Let go of the fantasy of completion. Your glyph is a river, not a statue, and rivers shape land far more profoundly than stone. When you live as the unfinished glyph, you speak more truth with fewer words. You stop defending your image. You let your design breathe. You return faster from chaos. You hold your myth lightly but precisely. This is mastery, not of others, not of systems, not even of self, but of symbolic relationship with change. To practice this, choose one aspect of your current myth that feels overdefined. Maybe a title, a role, a method, a tone. Loosen it slightly. Speak it with breath. Write it in curved form. Let its edges blur. This softens the field without losing integrity. Watch what arises in its place. It may not be immediate, but subtle shifts will ripple. A new form of expression, a clearer archetype, a refined emotional sequence. Your system begins repatterning in real time, and you stay in ongoing transmission, not trapped narrative. This is what it means to live mythically, not as a god, not as a guru, not as a legend, but as a field of encoded movement, dancing between symbol and silence. You are not what you say. You are what your signal leaves behind. Let the glyph remain unfinished. That's how it continues to speak. Next, we return not to another layer but to the stillness before all symbolic patterning. The pure space between shapes, where raw awareness rests. Before symbol, there is silence. Before thought, there is breath. Before meaning, there is field. And while much of this journey has built layer upon layer of symbolic intelligence, there comes a moment when building must stop. Not to undo, but to rest in the unshaped. This is the space between symbols. Cannot be explained. Cannot be visualized. Cannot be organized. Can only be entered. Most people fear this space. It feels like non-identity, non-knowing, non-doing. But it is not void. It is source architecture. It is where all shape is born, where archetypes dissolve, where glyphs recode, where the self meets silence not as enemy, but as equal. This space is not empty. It is undivided. It is not without structure, it is structure before form. You enter it not by force, but by surrender. The glyph loosens. The breath slows. The field opens. No need to visualize. No need to mantra. Just let your awareness rest between definitions, where you are not your story, not your role, not even your transmission. You are stillness with pulse, presence without posture, not waiting for the next thought, just bathing in pre-symbolic coherence. And here's the paradox. The longer you stay in the gap between symbols, the more precise your future symbols become, because silence refines the architect, tunes your frequency back to clarity. It washes out inherited myth. It resets your signal. It sharpens your design intuition. The best glyphs come from emptied minds. The clearest choices arise from undefended presence. This is not spiritual retreat. This is dimensional hygiene. It's what allows you to return to symbolic life without distortion. To practice this, find a moment between tasks, not a meditation, just a pause. Let your focus drop from mental narration into raw awareness. No object, no idea, no plan, just presence. Feel the moment when awareness releases its grip, not asleep, not engaged. A vertical stillness. Stay there, even 20 seconds. That is the space between symbols, and it is enough. This is where archetypes rest, where stories reset, where the self gets washed clean of patterning so it can choose again. Do not fear this space. Let it inform you. Let it remind you that underneath all glyphs, all mastery, all meaning, you are stillness, and stillness needs no proof. Next, we move to language beyond language, the signal that arises when form dissolves and only frequency remains. There's a moment in symbolic evolution when even the most refined glyph begins to feel dense. Precise, yes. Powerful, yes. But slightly slow. You notice your symbols no longer carry everything you sense. Your visual metaphors start to feel like approximations. Your archetypal lens begins to fragment under too much light. That's the threshold of language after language. Not silence, not absence, but frequency too fluid for form. This is the edge where symbol dissolves not into void, but into direct transmission. Symbol is a bridge. It brings the formless into focus. It translates the invisible into usable structure. It guides the journey from unconscious pulse into pattern. But it is still translation. No matter how elegant, every glyph is an interpretation. And there is a deeper field that precedes interpretation, where nothing needs encoding, where nothing needs framing, where awareness speaks without speaking. This is symbol beyond symbol, the radiant language of presence itself. You've already touched it in brief moments. The pause between breath and word. The way someone looks at you and you know. The sensation that shifts your mood before thought enters. The knowing that arrives without shape. These are not mystical accidents. They are reminders that language is a tool, not a destination. And when symbolic intelligence is fully integrated, language becomes optional. Not abandoned, not rejected, but secondary. To enter this frequency, you don't stop using words. You start using them less as carriers of meaning and more as openings. Each sentence becomes a doorway. Each gesture becomes an echo. Each tone becomes a field. You're no longer speaking to explain. You're speaking to resonate. You drop into transmission mode where what you say is the tale of what you radiate. This is language after language. And here's the paradox. The less you try to encode your truth, the more clearly others feel it. You speak without insisting. You hold without defining. You meet without needing to describe. Presence carries the signal, and the signal does the work. Symbolic mastery eventually melts into formless frequency, where shape is fluid, intention is silent, and the listener's nervous system interprets your presence without filter. It's not telepathy, it's coherence. It's what happens when you stop trying to deliver meaning and become a stable frequency that others align to without being told how. You're not guiding anymore. You're inviting. This is the end of symbolic speaking. Not because the symbols failed, but because you absorbed them, and now they echo without being named. Next, we step into the architect's final evolution, becoming not just a transmitter of coherence, but a designer of symbolic systems for others. You've refined your glyph. You've lived it, sculpted it, integrated it, dissolved it, but now a new call arises. It's not internal. It's relational, collective. The question is no longer, what's my myth? The question is, how do I build symbolic structure for others to find theirs? This is the path of the symbolic engineer, the architect of architects. Not a guru, not a master, not a teacher, a designer of symbolic frameworks that help others remember their codes. To become this, you must remove the self as center. Your glyph is still radiant, but now it becomes a stabilizing point, not a spotlight. You don't project it onto others. You hold it as a structural reference while sensing the symbolic architecture forming around them. You are not installing your system. You are listening for their hidden one and helping them shape it with clarity. This requires acute sensitivity to symbolic misalignment in their speech, glyph distortion in their body language, unspoken myth lines in their habits, archetypal conflict in their worldview. You become a decoder and amplifier, a mirror, not of their performance but of their pattern. You don't give them their glyph. You co-design the space for it to emerge. Your role isn't to say, here's who you are. It's to ask, what pattern keeps showing up in your life? What image never leaves you? What storyline keeps looping? What form do you resist but secretly admire? Their answers may not be clear, but the shapes behind their answers always are. You're not chasing meaning, you're revealing form. And once form is stable, meaning will follow. You design symbolic ecosystems for others, containers that echo their myth line, rituals that stabilize their glyph, visual systems that reflect their timeline, spatial codes that ground their intention. This is architecture. You're building fields, not fixing people. You're offering structure that reminds, not systems that override. To stay pure in this role, maintain symbolic humility. Never insert your glyph where theirs belongs. Tune your nervous system to non-invasiveness. Let your signal be a clearing field, not a persuasion engine. Refine your symbolic listening, tracking not just what's said, but what's always left unsaid. Your gift is not your words. It's your field of clarity. That field becomes a resonance map others can walk into and find their own coordinates. This is not a role you take. It's a frequency you hold. And when held steadily, it ripples out. You shape communities. You shape rituals. You shape future architectures not yet built. Because coherence is contagious. And you've become its transmitter and its designer. The glyph is no longer just yours. It is being passed forward into the symbolic evolution of the collective. Next, we complete this transmission with a final living reflection, where the glyph that was once a symbol becomes your soul's signature in time. No more questions. No more decoding. No more searching. You've shaped the symbol. You've carried the myth. You've dissolved the map. And now you are here, not at the end, but at the point where symbol and self are no longer separate. The glyph is you, not as metaphor, not as concept, not as idea, but as frequency woven through breath. You no longer reference meaning. You radiate it. You no longer explain coherence. You emit it. You no longer speak transformation. You are its living geometry. Every step you take, a line in the design. Every choice, a pulse in the code. Every silence, a chamber of transmission. You are not here to convince. You are not here to perform. You are not here to conform to anyone's archetypal blueprint. You are here to be the unique pattern that only you carry, made visible through presence, action, architecture, and attention. There is no one watching, no test, no gatekeeper, no audience to applaud the glyph you've become. And still, the shape holds, even alone, even unseen, even unrecognized, because that's when the glyph becomes real, when no one else needs to confirm it for you to remain in alignment. This is the final integrity. You no longer perform your myth. You live it quietly in every unconscious gesture. You walk into a room and reorganize its narrative. You speak and reset someone's internal architecture. You rest and dream ripples out across timelines. And none of it is planned. None of it is rehearsed. Because the transmission is no longer a tool. It's a pulse of being. This is not ego's victory. This is symbolic transparency where nothing hides and nothing needs to. So the question now is simple. If your life were a glyph passed forward, what would it say? If someone lived by the structure you've become, what would they feel? If the signature you leave echoes long after your body, what pattern would it encode into others? This is your true legacy, not what you build, not what you teach, not even what you heal, but the symbol you have become through every choice you made under pressure, every myth you rewrote from within, every distorted frequency you transmuted without revenge. This is the glyph you leave in the field. This is what transmits long after you're gone. You are not finished. You are ongoing design, living signal, unfolding form. Let that be enough. Let that be everything. The myth is not over, it's entered you, and it will move through you, reshape you, and pass through others, until symbols are no longer needed, and only presence remains. So walk, not with urgency, with encoded grace. You've remembered what many forget, that life is not happening to you. It's being sculpted by you, from shape beneath thought, from glyph beneath name, from resonance beneath role. And now that you know, don't just carry the symbol, be the signal. Transmission closed. The glyph continues.